Chapter 23. Resilience.
Impact!
Aiden heard the words loud and clear, felt the mana in the air thin the way it always does before every teleportation. He'd been teleported enough times to know how it worked. It wasn't about mana strength or level or anything of the kind. You either withstood it or you did not. The ones who did not were people who didn't know how to prepare themselves. Or, at least, that was what he'd been told. Fear was another thing that affected teleportation effects. The world turned a dark blue. It was deep and all-consuming. Then Bandiv vanished. Aiden held his list in his hand, wondering at the names that weren't crossed out. He'd sent Dead to a certain broker of information, and had been funneling a certain portion of his daily stipend from the palace into payment for this broker's services. Dead was the go-between for them, for now, until Aiden was ready to meet the man. In Aiden's old life, he'd eventually found a team that worked for him in the Order.
They had not all been part of the Order, though. In fact, 2 of them had been mercenaries, not adventurers. He wasn't surprised that the broker couldn't find Olsted. Aiden had no idea how long Olsted had been in the Order before he'd joined them. For all he knew, the man might have always been in the Order. Shiwa was a tricky situation. After their breakup in his past life, she'd driven Aiden mad enough times that sometimes he'd looked at Spellbinder and wondered just how bad it would be if he got a little too close to her during one of his swings whenever they were working together. He had never done anything close enough to that, but he'd wondered. Still, she was one of the best at what she did, and he knew how to handle her to an extent. Thinking of her made him feel odd. While she had been a terrible girlfriend, she hadn't been without her good and her reasons. Besides, it wasn't like he had been perfect. He'd had his issues too. The names on the list belonged to his team, his old team. They were the people he required to do the jobs he knew he needed to do. But some of those names were sentimental. Zen, for one, was replaceable, if Aiden was being honest. His name was only on the list for sentimental reasons. But did he really want them? Were they even good at what they did now, as they had been in his previous life? 11 years were a lot of years. Aiden paused as he noticed something wrong. He knew how teleportation worked, and had been waiting for the disorientation that came with it, but his mind was still functioning properly. Right now, thinking was supposed to be difficult. His brows furrowed in thought as he tried something. Aiden raised his hand in front of him, brought it up, then back down. Ups still up, and downs still down. Something was wrong. Finally, he raised his head from the piece of paper and looked around him. The darkness of deep blue surrounded him. He was still in the carriage seating. Beside him was Valdon, and in front of him was Eliswit. The princess had something of a pained expression on her face, like she was trying to take a really huge dump. Everything was also frozen. This wasn't right. Then Aiden watched as the carriage slowly dissolved. Bits and pieces flowed away like sand in the air as it disintegrated right in front of him, around him. It started from the roof, releasing them into the emptiness of the darkness around them. When it got to their head level, Eliswit's arm shattered like a crumbling sandcastle and was blown in the non-existent wind. Aiden wasn't sure what was going on. Was this what happened during a teleportation? Many theories he'd read simply believed that teleportation magic somehow folded the space around them so that the teleported simply appeared on the other side. Teleportation was practically instantaneous, after all. Others speculated that it worked on the same principle as those who had teleportation skills. The magic tore a hole in the world and deposited the teleported on the other side. But this was literal disintegration. And it wasn't even pretty. He started when Valdon's thigh burst into smoke, and Eliswit's head followed immediately after. There was just something wrong about sitting opposite a headless princess.
Calm down, Aiden. This is just teleportation. Nothing's wrong with them. Even then, it was an odd sight. But why am I aware of everything? He'd experienced at least 8 long-range teleportations in his life, and he'd been awake for none of them. There had always been a process. Teleportation came with disorientation, confusion, then reorientation. It was a standard process. And when you came to Nestild the first time, it was with geometric signs, a summoning circle appearing over your head. Then you just disappeared. The same rules hadn't been followed this time. He remembered it clearly. Ted had watched him crumble like sand. He'd seen it too as he'd lost his hand, just as everything around him was going. There was something in there, some alteration that had affected him. Probably a side effect from coming back in time. Everything crumbled as one. They did not take their time like they already were. They just turned to dust and scattered away, blown away by a non-existent wind. Aiden was left alone, sitting on the air with a piece of paper in his hand. He looked around him and found the darkness swirling. It was moving, sifting through itself. It felt as if it was an extremely thick mist, and someone kept shooting balls of air into it. Wait, he thought, looking around, realization coming to him. I'm the ball of air. The darkness wasn't what was moving. He was. But he couldn't feel his movement. As far as he was concerned, he was stationary. So what the hell was... Resilience 50.03% to 62%. What the hell? Aiden stared at the notification in front of him. That was well over a 10% jump. Mastery didn't take such a skip unless you were under a very significant amount of pressure. And he wasn't. Or was he? This was new to him. Teleporting without actually teleporting was unheard of. Even people that used teleportation skills didn't know what happened between when they teleported and when they arrived. According to the few he'd met, it was like blinking. One moment they were at point 1, and the next they were at point 2. What was the possibility that simply being aware during a teleportation was already taking a blow to his resilience? Resilience, 62% to 67%. Aiden looked around. Now he was getting scared. There were mysteries in the world of Nestild, mysteries he had failed to uncover in his past life. But this was not one of them. This was not even a mystery. It was an accepted truth. On Earth, the mystery of what exactly the Earth's core looked like up close was not something you considered ever uncovering. It wasn't even on the list. Right before long, a sudden jerk went through Aiden. It was like somebody struck him all over the body with only one blow. It was sudden and immediate. Health, 82%. What the hell? Mana, 68%. Aiden stared at the alert. Why was he losing mana? And why the hell was he suddenly dying? Stamina, 88%. He rushed up from his seated position, and another physical blow struck him all over the body. It staggered him, but he did not fall. Health, 78%. Mana, 63%. Stamina, 82%. This wasn't right. Simply being here was killing him. He needed to get out. How did someone get out of a teleportation? Aiden's mind ran through everything he knew about Nastildy and the functions of the world, and found nothing to answer his question. It was unsurprising, though. There was no answer to this. I need to get out of here, he muttered, still panic slowly wrapping itself around him. Even the attacks he was receiving were not leaving pain. They were just chipping away at his life stats.
It was also building his resilience.
But at what cost? What good would making it to perfect mastery do for him if he was dead? Aiden's mind was still racing when the atmosphere changed. It was still as dark as he remembered it, but mountain peaks seemed to be appearing in the distance, stretching as far as the eyes could see. And there was something behind them, as if it was being kept away. Compelled by his curiosity, Aiden squinted at it, trying to make heads or tails of what he was looking at. He wasn't even sure he was staring at mountain peaks. They could easily be illusions, figments of his imagination, his mind trying to find familiar logic in the illogical. You have used skill, detect. Only one word came to mind at the sight of the notification. Shit. That was not a good sign. If detect was activating involuntarily, then it meant there was something to detect. Please let it be the mountain peaks, he prayed. Please let it be the mountain peaks. It was not. There was a darkness behind the mountain peaks. It was darker than everything else, and now Aiden could almost make a shape out of it. It was like an entire horizon that dwarfed the mountain peaks, larger than life itself. The air around him grew heavy, and a heavy pressure brought Aiden down to his knees immediately. It crushed him on all sides and forced the air out of his lungs. It came with pain, and he couldn't breathe. Health, 78%, 63%. Mana, 63%, 48%. Stamina, 82%, 59%. Aiden coughed up blood. His body trembled and his hands shook. The pressure did not let up. You have used skill. Detect. Aiden's mind couldn't focus on the notification. Just at the edge of his vision, his life stats continued running down. He felt his blood trickle from his own ear. His vision grew blurry. His heart beat slower in his chest with each passing moment. Resilience, 71% to 83%. His chest tightened, and he felt something warm in his stomach. He tasted metal in his mouth. Against his will, his gaze was pulled back to the mountain peaks, drawn to it, to the dark horizon beyond it. It terrified him. The horizon dwarfed the mountains, dwarfed everything. He knew in that moment that he wasn't looking at a horizon. Whatever that was, dwarfing everything, it was not a horizon. Health, 63%, 32%. Mana, 48%, 21%. Stamina, 69%, 12%. He was dying too quickly. It was as if the realization was killing him as well. Aiden couldn't believe it. A second chance at life, and he was going to die from simply living. It wasn't even ludicrous enough to be funny. It was a terrifying thing to know you were dying, but not know why. It was a horrible way to go. But Aiden knew why. He knew it deep in his soul. He was staring at the reason he was dying. Against his will, his skill continued to activate. You have used skill, detect. He was using the skill, but he wasn't seeing the effect.
Nothing was...
A simple notification appeared over the horizon, a bleep when compared to its vastness, but Aiden could read it. Multiverse agent level. Resilience, 83% to 92%. Health, 32% to 18%. Mana, 21% to 0.2%. Stamina, 12% to 0.8%. Then the horizon moved. Aiden understood what it meant when powerful men claimed that fear was a very powerful force. It was about to kill him, after all. Everything crashed into Aiden in one swift motion. It was like stars colliding. 1 minute he was staring at the impossible, the next he was back in a world. The air around him trembled, and he sucked it in with every breath. He filled his lungs, dying even as he did, He could smell blood. He could taste blood. There was sound, too. A lot of sound. He felt other things around him, but he couldn't react. He was terrified of moving. His fist held on to a tiny piece of paper with the most unimportant piece of information right now. The familiar brown floor of a carriage stared back at him, stained red in his own blood. Between him and the carriage ground was a simple notification. Health, 0.2%. Resilience, mastery, 98%. None of them mattered. He heard his name, but wasn't sure he was allowed to answer. Could the multiverse agent hear him? Even now, back in the real world, was he free from it? Was he even allowed to breathe? There were more mentions of his name. People were trying to talk to him, he was sure of it, but his mind refused to function properly. Aiden knew he had to ground himself, focus his attention on something real. Where was he? He hadn't forgotten, but he needed to still remind himself. He was on a trip to the south, to the hospitable manor of House Naranoff. Why? Because time was moving too slowly, and he couldn't just sit idly by and twiddle his thumbs while waiting for Brandis to send them to the town of cannibals.
He wanted to check out the cave in the south, see if he could get a unique skill while he waited. Right? Or was there more? The tension was ebbing from his body. His fear and panic were subsiding. He could breathe freely again. He heard his name once more, but it didn't come from any familiar voice. What the hell? He muttered to himself in a weak voice, the experience of what had just happened going through him. What had he just witnessed? Was that what he had made an enemy of? Was that what a multiverse agent was? How did he even fight such a thing? How did you fight something that dwarfed mountains and spanned horizons? Something that killed you without even being aware of you? The answer was simple. I can't fight that. It took a few minutes of panicking and chaos before the carriage settled down. Valden looked like a mess. His hair was chaotic and unkempt from running his hand through it every 2 seconds. Aiden wasn't entirely sure if the knight was worried over the king's guest, or a training partner, or a friend. It was difficult to tell. No, it isn't, he thought, as he held a health potion in his hand, his palm wrapped around the round tube. That you can't tell says more about you than him. Aiden paid the thought little attention as he uncorked the potion. His hand continued to tremble. In front of him, Elliswood was panicking as well, but hers was more contained. She looked more confused than worried. Aiden's shaking hand moved the potion to his mouth. Slowly, Aiden, Valden said, with a soothing voice that couldn't hide his panic. Don't rush it. Aiden put the potion to his mouth. The liquid inside the glass container was green, as all health potions are. It tasted like tea and freshly cut grass. Health 0.2% to 0.8%. Aiden drank slowly. They'd given him health first because it was most important. There was no importance in stamina or mana if health hit 0. Everyone waited. The panic around was subsiding as Aiden drank. Valden had sent anyone who could see inside the carriage away. When he was done with the potion, emptied its contents into his stomach, he dropped the empty vial unceremoniously and eased himself back to a sitting position. He remained on the carriage floor. Health 74%. He was in the safe now, unlikely to die from being squeezed a little too hard by someone a little too strong. Valden gave him another vial. What's it up to? 74. Aiden took the vial from him. The second vial contained blue liquid. It seemed mana was next. As Aiden uncorked the second vial and started drinking, Valden looked more worried. That's a full health potion from my personal stash, he said. Aiden, something's very wrong. What happened?
Aiden finished the mana potion, and his mana stat came up. Mana, 88%. He looked at the empty vial, then at Valden. He shook the vial gently. A full mana potion from your personal stash. Valden nodded, frowning.
Well, that was a rookie move. Everyone knew that you didn't use a full-strength potion unless you were in a combat situation and needed to full points. Also, they were more expensive than the partial recovery potions. Can I get a partial for stamina? Aiden shook the empty mana vial once more. He dropped the empty vial on the ground. This one only got me up to the 80s. Valden stared at the empty vial. That doesn't make any sense. Aiden didn't think so. It was rare, but there were instances where a person was so damaged that their life stats needed natural time to heal. Damages like those were more qualitative than quantitative. For instance, if someone of his level survived a blow from someone with levels in the hundreds, such a thing would lead to such a situation. Aiden eased himself back and sat on the ground. He finally took notice of Eliswit. The princess didn't look so worried anymore, but she was giving him an odd look. Aiden cocked a brow at her.
You good?
She shook her head. The action was slow, reflective. What kind of world did you come from? She asked. What was your world like? Aiden paused. He hadn't expected that. It was a fun world, he answered. Video games, electricity, internet. It wasn't so bad. For the most part, it was peaceful, too. Thinking about Earth made him smile. It was nostalgic. Are you sure? Was there no violence? Eliswit frowned. You are a sharp contrast to what you describe of your world. Even the look on your face says you miss it. But Valden stuck his head out of the carriage, and a moment after he returned with a vial of yellow liquid. Aiden took it from him. Partial recovery, Valden nodded. Designed to give at least a 30% increase. 30% worth of stamina was better than what he currently had. Aiden's breathing was normal now. His stamina had increased by a few percent by its own. He could breathe better. With his health and mana increased, he was practically in good health. He uncorked the stamina potion, but didn't put it to his mouth. What do you mean by a sharp contrast? He asked Eliswit instead. Pain, she said, without missing a beat. You handle it too well for someone your age. The teleportation disoriented you so badly for some reason that you practically almost died. And yet, here you are, like this was simply a walk in a park. What kind of world did you come from that you have no fear of death? I have no fear of death. Eliswit had no idea just how wrong she was. Aiden was yet to meet a living being that did not fear death. If it was capable of thought, death would definitely terrify it. There were those that welcomed death, but they were different. You could not fear what you crave. I fear death, Princess, he said, staring down at the yellow liquid that would recover his stamina. His memory took him back to a time when he had done something daring and stupid. A time when his interface had informed him of his own death. Aiden shook the thought from his head. I just do not let it control my life. But every day I escape death is a day I do not die. I can't spend such days remembering that I might die. Eliswit frowned, and Valden placed a hand on Aiden's shoulder. She's right, he told him. Even your response is not something to come from a child who lived life in a peaceful world. I know you stand by your world, that your world was good, but it is hard to believe you. Perhaps you grew too accustomed to the world you lived in, that you think whatever it was putting you through was normal. I would like to see this world if I one day can, Lord Lockhart. I would like to see a world that made you so at so young an age. Aiden looked the knight in the eye. You're living in it. He left the words unsaid, and instead said, I strongly believe that will not be possible. Then he drank the stamina recovery potion. Stamina 8% to 14%. Stamina 32%. Chapter 24. Nella. The events after their teleportation were simple. After Aiden had drunk his potions, Elliswit demanded that the carriage remain in the Naranov's teleportation port for a while longer. She hoped to use it to allow Aiden to catch his breath, despite all his insistence that he was fine. Clothes and bowls of water were brought into the carriage. Since there was no practical place to take a bath, Aiden was left to clean himself of his own blood with wet clothes as best he could. The entire ordeal was uncomfortable. In the end, he abandoned the task with a degree of petulance deserving of his current age. He wasn't going to spend all this time cleaning blood from his skin if his clothes were still going to be bloodied regardless.
"We can find a place for you to change into spare clothes," Valden suggested when Aiden voiced his opinion.
Like hell we will, Aiden scowled. Let's just get to House Naranov so I can get an actual bath and a change of clothes. I'm more interested in getting the bastard who messed up once we get back, Elliswit scowled. They almost got a guest of the kingdom killed for their silly mistake. Aiden paused. He and Valden looked at her. What? He asked, confused. Obviously, someone made a mistake in preparation for the teleport, Elliswit said. No one almost dies from being teleported. Aiden cocked a brow. The last thing he wanted was this turning into a witch hunt. You know you and Sir Valden came out completely fine, right? He said. In fact, I'm ready to bet the entire entourage came out completely fine. He turned to Valden. Has there been any complaint outside? Valden shook his head.
No. Are you saying that this entire thing might have something to do with your composition? Elliswit asked.
Aiden nodded.
That is very likely. Then I must inform my father. It is his intention to have you and your companions use the teleporters for your tasks. The last thing we want are such problems turning up.
Aiden waved her worries aside with a gesture. They'll be fine. The problem is likely specific to my constitution. Also, can we please get back on the road? The task I came here for is one I must complete as quickly as possible. I would very much like to return to my brother as soon as I can. Valden sighed. He stuck his head out of the carriage once more, and with a few spoken words, they were moving again. Why just you? Elliswit asked. No idea, Aiden said. It's merely a possibility. It has been speculated that I would react differently to space magic after what happened the day I arrived.
I probably have a different reaction as compared to the others.
Elliswit's brows furrowed. Speculated by who? A certain old man that your father keeps in his company. That sufficed to silence Elliswit. It seemed every member of the royal family knew not to question the words of the sage. About this task, Valden said as their journey continued, what is it? I, too, would like to know your reason for coming so far down south, Elliswit said. You do understand that the Naranov house is the family of former knight Derendorf, right? Aiden knew that. Aiden was seated now, allowing the gentle sway of the carriage relax him as they moved along the cobblestone. Would you be willing to tell me what business you have in the south as well, Princess? He returned. Elliswit, she corrected. In the presence of Sir Valden and no one else, it is Elliswit to you, Lord Lockhart. I thought it bothered you when I obeyed. It did not bother me.
It merely took me by surprise how quickly you took to it.
Me too, Valden said. It was like you were waiting for it. Aiden shot the knight a look. Valden was not fazed. Well, Princess, he said, what brings you so far out to the south? Honest answer? Elliswit crossed her legs. Nothing. Valden looked at her. You came with us for no reason, Princess. I wouldn't go as far as to call it no reason, exactly. To be more precise, I heard of your intended departure and figured that the presence of the princess will carry more weight and authority than a piece of paper. That piece of paper was penned by your father. Aiden pointed out. By that very fact, it is system-bound. Refusal by the receiving party to obey it will have repercussions. And yet, it is still ultimately a piece of paper, Lord Lockhart. She smiled with false innocence. That said, may I call you Aiden only in the presence of Sir Valden, of course. All this lord and lady is taking a toll on me. Aiden shrugged. You may do as you wish. Your gods know I've been trying to get Sir Valden to call me by my name since forever. He continues to act like it is anathema. You've only made the request of me a handful of times, Lord Lockhart, Valden said, aghast. And that was in our earlier days. Aiden intentionally ignored the knight to continue. The first time he called me by my name was after he almost took my head off with a sword skill. At least, I believe it was a sword skill. Lord Lockhart, Valden protested, suddenly nervous. Again, Aiden pretended not to hear. My life flashed before my eyes. It was terrifying. Lesser men would have wet themselves. Ilaswit smiled, noticing what he was doing. She leaned forward in interest. And was it fun, your life? Aiden shrugged. It was filled with images of a man sparring with me, too uptight to even take off his armor. Yet said man tried to kill you. Aiden shivered dramatically.
It was vastly unknightly.
That's not even a word, Valden protested. I will like to put on the record that this level of treatment can be considered, in some spaces, to be bullying. So is using a sword skill on a classless at level 49, Sir Valden, Eliswit retorted, eyes and smile still firmly fixed on Aiden. Is my father aware of this? Valden stiffened, and Aiden laughed. Please do not terrify my knightly friend, Princess, he said with an amused smile. He tends to grow terrified when the king is involved. I remember telling you my name, Lord Lockhart. Eliswit's smile seemed teasing. What do I have to do to make you remember it? Aiden stared at her for a while, contemplating. He leaned forward, suddenly discovered a headache, and fought to hide his reaction to it. Since no one said anything, perhaps he was successful. He rested his forearms on both knees and met Eliswit's eyes. They were a soft amber, a copy of Brandis's, but without the age and steadiness that came with the time and accomplishments. Careful, Princess, he said softly. What would happen if your brother were to find out you were having me call you by name? Eliswit shrugged. He'd make some noise, and I'd beat him up to make a point. Vicious. True. Eliswit shrugged easily. And yet, you don't seem put out by my viciousness. Valden looked between the both of them. Please tell me this isn't happening. Aiden chuckled. Yes, Sir Valden. This isn't happening. Eliswit finally looked at Valden. And should my father learn of what isn't happening between Lord Lockhart and myself, I will deny it quite equivocally. Aiden gave Valden an apologetic smile. Me too, my friend. Valden groaned and put his head back. This is my fault. I was the one that wanted to be a +1. Eliswit slapped him on the knee in a casual gesture. Cheer up, Sir Knight. Some air outside the castle every now and again is good for you. She turned back to Aiden. Now, about that task you have to do in the south. Well, I guess that's how far I can avoid it. When you tell me yours, Princess. I'm here to assist in making your travels and endeavors smoother, she said, still smiling. And no, my parents do not know of my intentions. I told my mother that I was coming down south for a breath of fresh air, though I believe she harbors thoughts that I might be coming because you are. Aiden nodded. Well, it's never a good thing to lie to one's mother, Princess. However, if you must insist, I'm here for the cave. Everyone paused. The cave? Valden asked. As in, the cave? Aiden nodded. And how did you learn of the cave? Valden continued, pointedly.
Another piece of information from the library.
Princess Elaswit looked at him.
It's something Lord Lockhart does,
Valden explained.
He spends so much time in the library that any odd piece of information he has that he shouldn't have usually ends up coming from the library. In case you do not know, Lord Lashart, we all know it's a lie most of the time.
Aiden shrugged. The library story was already a bust, especially since the unique skill incident.
It's a vast library, Sir Valden. Anything can be found in a library so vast. But yes, I am going for the cave.
Elaswit looked between the both of them before asking,
And how did you learn of the cave? The soldier, dead. He's been gathering information for me. Things I would be unable to learn within the palace.
Elaswit sat back.
That would explain the correspondence, then. Surely Sir Valden would not be able to get the kind of information you seem so interested in. But what is your intention for this cave?
Valden frowned.
Before that, Lord Lashart, how long have you been aware of this cave?
Aiden knew what Valden was aiming at.
The cave was rumored to give unique skills for any who conquered it.
They said it had been months since anyone entered and came out with a unique skill. However, people didn't venture into it very often anymore, since adventurers and mercenaries were now often known to not return. Aiden knew the story. People were dying. The Adventure Guild branch in the south had declared the cave off-limits until it could be confirmed safe. At least, safe enough as far as the word could go for adventurers. The reason was simple. The cave had been corrupted by demonic mana. It wasn't enough to be an issue. It was definitely little enough to still be covered up, though anyone could make the argument that that was only the case because not many people knew what demonic mana looked and felt like right now, except those in power. For now, the Adventure Guild was covering that little bit of information up. It was after my unique skill, Sir Valden, Aiden answered. However, I have come to the conclusion that I need a unique class skill, Valden interrupted with a frown. Don't you think it might be too much of a risk? Adventurers have been reported to go missing in that cave recently. Despite his own words, Aiden could see the contemplation on the knight's face. He wasn't surprised. With the new bit of information he'd learned of the knight, it was no surprise at all. At level 49, he had most definitely hit the wall to level 50, and it was common knowledge for those who rose high enough that possessing a unique class skill was one of the things that helped in breaking that wall. But a unique class skill only made it relatively easier. Unlike most levels, a person needed more than just experience and skill mastery for every 50 levels. At level 49, one needed to practically create their own skill. A skill strong enough for the system to register to get to level 50. The trick, as Aiden had learned in the Order, was in the amalgamation of all the class skills. The world of Nestild called them conditional skills, or techniques. You had to use all your class skills in the right way at the right time to finally discover a final skill. It was a person's ultimate technique, so to speak. Considering the new direction of his class, Aiden had a feeling he would struggle to achieve level 50 in this timeline. Is this true, Lord Lockhart? Eliswood asked. Even I know of the deadliness of the cave. Did my father sanction this outing, even though he knew this? Not directly, Aiden answered. What exactly does not directly mean? It means he is not aware of the fact that I am here for the cave, Aiden answered. But knowing your father, he has certainly put the possibility of me going there into consideration. Valden shook his head, still contemplating. Lord Naranoff will not agree to this. I do not doubt that for a second, Aiden smiled. Then how do you wish to convince him? Elaswit asked. Am I to be your trump card in this? I have some skills worthy of adventuring, but I do not. Aiden couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. Sir Valden, Princess, it seems my age continues to blind you in some way.
He shook his head, battling to rein in his laughter as it worsened his headache. The princess I can understand. But you, Sir Valden, you should know me well enough by now. I am not like the 19-year-olds you know. Elaswit looked at Valden, and Valden nodded. He is not. He thinks in the most outlandish ways, completely different from what I've learned of his companions. If you don't need me, she said, then how do you intend to convince Lord Naranoff? Aiden folded his arms and stared out at the beautiful city Lord Naranoff governed. Who said anything about telling him? The Naranoff house was about an hour's ride away from the teleport center. When they arrived, their entourage was double its size. It seemed the reception that had been waiting for them at the teleport center had basically been the same size. They dismounted in relative silence. The princess exchanged a few words with Valden, then exchanged a few words with some of the attendants that had come with her. Everyone waited while she did this. Only when she was done did processes conclude. Like most manors, the main house was situated at the center of the estate. The building itself almost rivaled the castle, and Aiden had a feeling the only reason it did not was out of respect for the crown. After all, a noble did not simply compete with their king in such things. Lord Naranoff himself was not at the door to greet them. Instead, there were 3 maids, 2 butlers, and a woman in a combat attire, complete with light armor, a large quiver at her hip that held large arrows like the ones used by samurais, a long bow strapped to her back, and 2 falchions on both hips. She screamed, "Archer class!"
You still uphold your dastardly hobbies, I see. Princess Elaswit greeted the woman with a warm smile. How long has it been, Nella? She approached the woman with open arms, and they hugged as comfortably as Nella's attire allowed. They separated after a moment, but did not part. Elaswit's hands remained firmly on Nella's shoulders, and Nella's on hers. We saw not too long ago, Princess, Nella said, smiling widely. At the ball, remember? My family was the host. You can barely call that a meeting, Elaswit dismissed. That was some kingdom trying to show off their merchandise or something. Last I heard, none of the participants were knights. Nella cocked her brow inquisitively. Or squires, for that matter. Are there happenings in the palace that we low elites should be informed of? Elaswit took her hands from Nella's shoulders and laughed. I don't think so. But if there was, you know how my father can be. As long as his machinations are concerned, we are all low elites. Nella paused, as if having just remembered something. By the gods, she said, where are my manners? Then she turned to the maids and butlers beside her and gestured them forward. Hurry up now, help them with their things. Please, let's all come out from under the sun and take a breather in the manor. She finally took her eyes of Elaswit as her aides went to work. Her eyes settled on Aiden, and she stopped in her tracks once again. Her eyes widened in worry. Are you all right, Lord Lockhart? Aiden looked down at his blood-stained attire, unbothered by it. He was more impressed by how the maids and butlers had seen his bloodstains and said nothing. They'd simply gone about their requested business. Elaswit placed a hand on Nella's arm to calm her. It's nothing to worry about, she said. An odd reaction to teleportation magic. Never seen the kind. Nella looked from the princess to Aiden, then back. Her worry did not dampen. I've seen terrible reactions to teleportation, she said, but nothing that involved blood. Personally, Aiden was tired of standing, so he walked forward. He stopped a few paces away from Nella, making sure not to stand in the way of the servants. Would you be inclined to worry less if I said I slipped and fell? He asked. I've seen you fight, Lord Lockhart, Nella replied. You didn't slip and fall. I doubt you even know how to. Aiden knew how to. His time in the Order had ensured that he learnt a variety of things, some of which were sorely embarrassing. But this was no place to be proving a point. Then let it be said that I slipped and fell. He gestured dramatically at Valden.
On Sir Valden's honorable fist. Valden opened his mouth, sputtered incoherent words. I never touched the Lord, he finally declared in a slight panic. Nella laughed, and some of her worries seemed to dissipate with her laughter. She had a nice laugh, very unfitting of her present attire. Elliswit laughed as well. It is always a pleasure to see a knight all flustered. Reminds me of when we were younger, and you used to come visit often. Nella's smile widened in mischief. Remember how we used to try and make the knights give a reaction beyond, "My lady"? I swear, Sir Ivan got completely confused when I... Elliswit moved quickly, cutting off Nella's words with a hand over her mouth. She looked back as if making sure no one else heard, but Aiden was more than certain that there was no maid around that did not. Aiden cocked a questioning brow when his eyes met Elliswit's. We were children, she said, in way of explanation. Aiden's expression didn't change, although it did get a little teasing. I didn't say anything. Elliswit frowned at him, but said nothing more. Aiden couldn't help the half-smile that touched his lips. As for Nella, she looked between the both of them, puzzled. Then, after a short moment, a smile touched her lips as well. It was mischievous. It was a pity that Aiden knew nothing about the individuals of the Naranov bloodline. All his knowledge was of the house as a whole. When all the attendants had picked their carriage clean, and a stable boy or two, at least Aiden believed they were stable boys, led their carriage away, Elliswit spoke once more, addressing the official status of their visit. Where is your father? She asked Nella. Nella hesitated, then her shoulders deflated slightly. Busy, she said apologetically. We've been having issues with the adventurers for a while now, and he needed to attend to a certain situation. Elliswit frowned. By himself? Does he not have knights for that? He does. Nella gestured to the only maid left with them, and the girl shuffled off to the side to give them some space. But you know how my father likes to attend to certain issues himself. The adventurers have all but gone up in arms over the issue. And the issue? Elliswit pressed. Nella worried her bottom lip between her teeth. She shrugged after a while. It's not like it's a secret at this point, she said. It's more of an open secret, and I'm sure the palace knows of it. But there is a cave at the outskirts of our domain. Adventurers used to venture into it in search of a unique quest. Most of them hoped to get a unique skill. Elliswit nodded. This is known. What is not common knowledge, however, is the number of adventurers that have been venturing into the cave and not coming out in recent days. Aiden's attention focused on the conversation while he did his best to look only mildly interested. He should send out a decree as the Lord that none should enter then, Elliswit said, as if it was the simplest solution. He has, Nella said. But that's the thing about adventurers. They are citizens of the kingdom, but not entirely subjects of the crown. All are subjects of the crown, Valden said simply. Aiden knew better. Adventurers were a gray area when it came to being subjects of the crown. He'd seen the agreement the first king of Bandiv had signed with the first guildmaster. He wanted a decentralization of military might to a certain extent, so he had given the Adventure Guild a certain level of autonomy. The adventurers were not beholden to the crown, but they were to respect it. An adventurer could not be judged by the crown for crimes against his fellow adventurer, but he could be judged for his crimes against a citizen and subject of the crown. Choosing the path of an adventurer removed you from all default benefits of being a subject of the crown, as well as all the requirements. However, in return, it placed you under all benefits of the Adventure Guild, as well as its requirements. It was a complicated matter where all matters of the adventurers were left to the capable hands of the Adventure Guild, and the crown had no hold over it. However, there were certain factors that constituted exceptions, factors that allowed the crown intrude on adventurer business. The agreement with King Brandis I was signed and sealed and sanctioned by the system. Oddly, what most people did not know was that there was an order representative who'd served as witness to the effect, amongst other people. It was why the order also had a copy. But Aiden kept that all to himself. Nella looked at Valden with disappointed but accommodating eyes.
Spoken like a knight of the crown. However, you are wrong. And now I realize that I liked you better when you were flustered.
Aiden stepped in smoothly. Try not to hold it against him, lady.
Nella, she cut him off abruptly. To you, I am Nella.
It's the least I can do considering my brother's rashness. Alaswit looked from Nella to Aiden as if waiting for his reaction. Aiden had no idea what he was going to do. Once upon a time, he'd had almost no interactions with the princess. Now here he was, finding out that she now had expectations of him. This is noted, he replied cautiously. What I was trying to say is that Sir Valden is a knight of the crown. Such stiffness is to be expected of him as regards matters pertaining to the crown. I know, and that's why I preferred when you left him flustered. That said, she gestured to the maid who remained patiently waiting. If you follow Venice here, she will lead you all to your rooms. She stepped to the side, and Alaswit grabbed her by the arm. You're leaving? Sadly, yes. Nella really did look sad to say so. Unfortunately, my father has taken it upon himself to add me to this matter of the cave. He has said that I should gather a team and investigate this cave and the issues surrounding it. He wants a solution as quickly as possible. And if you were to find the issue? Aiden asked, knowing that she wouldn't. Up until the end of his life, there had been no discovered issues regarding the cave, until the demon wars had begun, when the demons had turned it into a base of operation for a short time. A few more people had gotten the unique quest, and many more people had died or gone missing before then. The issues surrounding it had never been resolved, at least not by House Naranov. But he wasn't going to just leave it at that after hearing such a piece of information. He looked at Valden with all the intent he could muster into his eyes without giving anything away. It took a moment, but the knight caught his look. Aiden popped his brows as subtly as he could, then cocked his head at Nella. Valden let the word drag out as he slowly turned to Nella, clearly unsure of what exactly was expected of him. I would say we. Aiden almost slapped his forehead. He's a lost cause.
Yes, Sir Valden, Nella asked.
You would say that we what? Valden looked at Aiden, and everyone turned to him. Aiden acted normal. Sir Valden turned back to Nella. I would be more than happy to be of assistance to you, if you do not mind. A knight is always a useful aid in such matters. Nella took a moment to think about it before shaking her head.
Nope, she said. My team is already full. Today will be our third day of investigations. Besides, we have enough knights as is, and as useful as they are, I actually hate adventuring with knights. They're always so chivalrous and charming. It's always, not there, my lady, this, and would you like to sit on my shoulder while I wave my massive sword, that?
You all are just too much. She shivered visibly, and the maid smothered a laugh with her hand. See, Nella pointed at the maid. Even Venice knows this. But if the princess wanted to come, I certainly wouldn't say no. She wiggled her brows at Alaswit. Alaswit smiled fondly, but shook her head. It would drive the entire city into confusion if anyone found out that the princess was here for adventuring. Untrue. Nella waved the worry aside with a flick of the wrist. It's been ages since the last royal portrait. I'm sure no one will recognize you. The royal portrait was updated last year, Alaswit pointed out flatly. Everyone will recognize me. Then we can give you a mask. I'm not here for adventures, Nella. Fine, Nella pouted, then changed her attention. "What of you, Lord Lockhart? Would you be happy to join me?" "Didn't you say your team was already full?" Aiden asked. She smiled at him flirtatiously. "There's always room for an enigmatic young lord that travels with a knight and a princess." Elliswit smacked her on the arm. "You are a lady. Behave." Nella stuck her tongue out at her. "Right now, I'm an adventurer, and we are sometimes known to be sleazy. Anyway, toodaloo. Venice will show you to your rooms. I had them picked out already. And I'll find you the moment I return." With that, she skipped her way down the road and towards the exit that was quite far from where they were. It was an odd sight to see a lady who looked like she was preparing for war with her hair braided back, skipping down the road. Elliswit let out a sigh when Nella was far enough. "I swear I love that girl, but she's growing up too slowly." To Venice, the maid, she added, "Please show us to our quarters." Venice walked inside the house and they followed. "What happened back there, Lord Lockhart?" Valden whispered as they walked.
"What happened," Aiden whispered back, "is that we need to spend more time together, so we know what each other needs without having to use words."
Valden looked puzzled. "That's a strange thing to say." "Well, you're a strange thing to say."
"I have no idea what that means."
Aiden sighed.
"Me neither. I think I just need a bath and a change of clothes."
Chapter 25. Knight of the Crown. Lord Naranoff did not show up on the day of the arrival of Aiden, Valden, and the princess's arrival. Neither did he show up the next day. Nella proved herself to be a well enough host, and after a few moments of confusion, Aiden was informed by Valden that House Naranoff had no lady of the house. Lady Naranoff had died a year ago during a specific daring adventure she had embarked on. It turned out that Nella had inherited her love for adventures. Aiden wondered if the woman's continued love for adventuring was because she loved it, or some kind of love for her mother. A tribute of some kind, perhaps.
He didn't know how these things worked, since he'd never lost someone very important to him.
He had lost people in his past life, but none of them held any true sentimental value to him. There had been an adventurer he had made friends with before Ted became the Demon King, but they were more like relatable acquaintances than friends. Members of the Order had died every now and again, and while it had hurt, it had felt more like losing a colleague than a friend. Some things remained difficult to understand until they were experienced. Aiden's training with Valden did not stop. On the day of their arrival, however, he trained alone in his room, mastering his class skills as much as he could. He learned more with every mastery increase. One of the things he found out was that there was no enchantment fitting of his level that he could engrave that he could not weave. Ensured that the enchantments applied to him.
Unfortunately, even the ones that were meant to be cast as AoE enchantments. When he cast, he became silent. It was an odd experience. His heartbeat became almost non-existent to him. Everything else functioned perfectly. He could hear the wind in his ear, but the sound of his feet touching the ground did not reach him. It was as though he'd silenced himself. Out of curiosity, he had punched the wall and had heard almost nothing. The sound was there, but it wasn't as loud as it should be. All enchantments worked on a principle of affecting mana. Enchantments that were meant to affect areas instead of items were engraved on tools that could be broken. The way they worked was that when broken, the enchantment funneled its purpose into every shattered piece of the item as it spread to establish its domain. It was possible to limit the default reach of an enchantment by limiting the range of impact, but it was like deciding to limit the range of a bomb. With enough planning and tools, it would be possible. Otherwise, it was a hard task to manage. So, as far as was concerned, Aiden was the item. Casting AoE enchantments did nothing but apply the effect, like every other enchantment, on himself.
thus had taken the enchantment that was supposed to cast a silent bubble that kept sound in and turned Aiden into the bubble. That was as much of as he learnt. On his first night, Aiden took his dinner in his room. Valden did not call for him or stop by to speak of training, and Aiden felt it was probably because of what happened with the teleportation. The night was probably giving him time to rest. Aiden spent the second day walking the estate grounds. It was almost as large as the palace grounds, possessing a room for every fathomable home activity possible. It had 4 wings for all 4 cardinal points. From what Aiden learnt, the west wing was out of bounds.
No one was to enter unless explicitly summoned. The north wing was specifically designated for guests. Currently, Aiden and Valden were the only guests housed in it, and Aiden was certain it was no coincidence. What he didn't know was if it was Lord Naranoff's idea, or if it was Brandis ensuring the secrecy of Aiden as much as he could. Valden came for Aiden on the evening of the second day, a few hours before dinner. If they had remained at the palace, it would have been the time for their sparring. Aiden was practicing AOE enchantments when he came, combining Enchanted Weave and Walking Canvas. While the former was a main skill of its own, the latter felt more like a supporting skill. The only thing Walking Canvas did was extend Aiden's mana so that it reached outside him. Surprisingly, it only reached about 6 feet in radius. When he used it, his mana decreased by only a single %. When he deactivated the skill, the percentage decrease was reverted. Still, if he held the skill active for too long, his mana percentage would eventually start decreasing, even if at a slow pace. The main mana consumption only happened when he activated alongside it, and it varied. Using both class skills together turned every enchantment he weaved into an AOE enchantment, regardless of what enchantment it was. At least that was applicable for the enchantments he could currently weave. Aiden had a working theory on why that happened. Valden knocked on his door while he was in the middle of deactivating. The constant use of the skill for the last 2 days had raised its mastery to 9%, and its range had increased by a few inches. The increase was arguably inconsequential, especially when his interface liked to measure distance in kilometers. But it was progress. "One moment," Aiden called out when the knock came again. He walked up to the door and placed a finger against it. All the doors had basic enchantment locks, but Aiden had tweaked his own a bit. It was a safety precaution, in case someone out there somehow had a master key that could unlock the enchantment from outside the room. It was not common, but it was not unheard of. Aiden unlocked the door and opened it to the sight of Valden outside his armor. Aiden leaned against the doorframe and smirked. "Have you come to get me to practice without your armor, Sir Knight?" Valden's brows furrowed in mild annoyance. "You are too old to be teasing someone capable of killing you in one blow, Lord Lockhart." Aiden cocked a brow. "You do remember that I'm only 19, right? I'm really not that old." Valden pinched the bridge of his nose. "Apologies, Lord Lockhart. It is often easy to forget. I guess you aren't too old for such antics." "You are here to drag me to training, though, right?" Aiden asked. Valden nodded. "I am." "Then please, lead the way." Their stroll through the manor wasn't as long as its size would indicate. At least it didn't feel so long. Valden walked with quick steps, as most knights do. He led them through the hallways and down the stairs until they went into a room. The room was large, hot, and filled with countless maids running around as they prepared one meal after the other and accomplished one task after the other. Valden had brought them to the kitchen. Aiden felt uncomfortable as they made their way through the kitchen, not because of anything, but the fact that they were getting in the way of normal people's tasks. Every maid and cook and help scrambled to get out of their way. Most paused their tasks just so they could bow and greet. Valden's responses were simple. He nodded to every bow and responded to every word with words of his own. When they came out of another door,
It was into the evening air.
Aiden suspected he knew why they had taken the back door, and through the kitchen at that, but he wanted to be sure his thoughts were the same as Valden's. "Any reason we had to disrupt the life of the nice people?" he asked as they walked towards another building in the evening air. Valden looked at him from the side of his eye. "You look like you already have your suspicions," he said. "I do," Aiden confirmed. "But I would also like to have them confirmed." "Fair enough. Since we arrived, I have felt like we have been kept under surveillance." "The Lord is keeping an eye on us," Aiden asked, though he didn't think that was the case. Valden shook his head. "No. It's more like someone is watching us on their own. It just feels off." "Personally, I wouldn't think too much about it," Aiden said. The path they followed curved and brought them closer to the next building. "I'd argue it's a spy from one of the other lords."
Lord Naranov suddenly gets 3 important guests, worthy of clearing out his entire guest wing. Any spy not wondering what exactly is happening deserves to lose their job. Valden shook his head. "But that's the problem. I've seen a few spies in my short time working under the king. This does not feel like it." Aiden thought about it, worrying his bottom lip between 2 fingers. Could be a spy from a different kingdom. No one says they have to limit themselves to the palace. "Nel Quan," Valden suggested. It was possible. If they were aware of the fact that Bandiv had their own summoned saviors, which they were, Aiden would not put it past them to set a spy to watch his every action. He had almost bested their best in unarmed combat, and displayed information he should not possess. He was also the only savior in Bandiv they were aware of. But would they go this far? Aiden doubted it. But he rethought his opinion soon after. If Jiangsu told their sage of my fighting style, then it won't be very surprising. Aiden let out a sigh. If that was the case, he would be in a different kind of problem. A sage's attention was not an easy thing. The attention of 2 sages would be worse. Brandis had referred to them as a natural disaster, which, if Aiden was not mistaken, was also the way some people referred to the Order. And if sages fought like the Order, it meant they shared a relationship with the Order. The question was, what was the relationship? Was the Order of the sages, or were the sages of the Order? It was a troubling question. "That's a deep sigh for a child of 19, Valden said. They were at the building now, and it looked more like an arena than a simple building. Valden opened the door and walked in, and Aiden followed. "How old are you, Sir Valden?" Aiden asked as they walked up a flight of stairs. Valden started, but schooled his expression. 40, Lord Lockhart, he answered. "Why?" "Just curious." In my world, those at the age of 19 are more correctly referred to as teenagers or young adults. It takes a certain age to see a 19-year-old and call them a child. Valden smiled. He was showing more expressions these days than in his earlier days with Aiden. "And does 40 fall under the category of said certain age?" Aiden gave it a quick thought. He would call a 19-year-old a child, and he was only in his 30s. Personally, I wouldn't say it does, but there are some that might differ. The staircase ended at another door, and Valden, ever the serving knight, opened it and waited for Aiden to walk through. It released them onto a balcony. The building was one of a wide extension of 4 other buildings that walled in a large space. Below them was a training ground, almost as wide as a small stadium. There were people engaged in training. On one side, the people wore armors and swung real swords and real spears, each one customized, some even flashy. Those that used the bow practiced with real arrows, sharpened tips designed to pierce more than just flesh. And their bows were equally customized. On the other side of the space, the inhabitants used simple long swords of the Bandiv design. Their combat and training was less demanding than their counterparts, and their spars were less entertaining to watch. Even those of them that used the bow used simple longbows and simple arrows fired at wooden dummies from over a good pace. Aiden leaned down, rested his arms on the balusters in front of him. "What are the requirements for knighthood, Sir Valden?" Valden did not emulate him. The knight remained standing, arms folded over his chest. "They are a lot," he answered. "Humor me with the most important." Aiden never took his eyes off of those fighting in their armor. "For one, the most important of them all, you have to achieve level 40, Valden said. "To serve as a direct Knight of the King, you have to achieve level 48. And at level 49, you've only been a Knight of the King for 3 months. "I see." The sage had assigned him to the baby knight. "What else?" "You have to have achieved something of great significance to the kingdom. It does not have to concern the kingdom as a whole, but it needs to have a significance. It is better if you achieve it yourself. If you are a part of it, then you need to have been a significant part of it." "And how does one tell if the part was significant?" "There are ways. At least the king can tell. The system gives the royal family great power over these things." Aiden nodded. It was probably one of their title effects. On Nastield, titles weren't only for combat benefits. Some were political, and some were of other varieties. Bakers often had titles that enhanced their baking skills. Artisans had the same. "What else?" he asked. This time, Valden turned to look at him. "You seem to be waiting for some specific piece of information. Perhaps if you told me what it is, I could confirm it for you." Aiden adjusted his arms on the railing. He continued to watch the armored trainees as 2 sparred, and one slipped below a dastardly blow from their opponent and slammed their blade into their opponent's torso. There was a flash of an enchantment on the recipient's armor before they were blasted back. "Everything you've said," Aiden said to Valden, "seems difficult, but it does not account for why there are so few knights under the employ of nobles. And while King Brandis has a grand array of knights, I know for a fact that they do not number more than 200. Valden frowned so deeply that it was almost a scowl. "That is information that even I do not possess, Lord Lockhart," he said. "I would advise that you treat all pieces of information given to you by the king in public or private as secrets of the crown." Aiden spared Valden a simple look.
"I will take that into consideration." It wasn't information Brandis had given him. Valden shook his head, but his frown faded. "The reason knights are so rare is because there is a title you must possess before you can apply as well. You need it to become a knight to anyone." "Which is?" "Giant Slayer." Aiden let out a low breath. Even in his previous life, he'd never gotten any title by that name. By its name alone, he had an idea what it entailed. "And how many levels is that?" he asked. "Levels? The opponent you are supposed to slay," Aiden clarified. "How many levels above you are they meant to be?" Valden smiled, genuinely impressed. "It is nice to know that your continued time in the library continues to yield fruits. Still, I guess it's not a difficult thing to decipher, given the name." Aiden nodded. "It is not." 20. This time, Aiden let out a very slow whistle, not a high one. "That's a lot." "It is," Valden agreed. "And so are the benefits. It gives plus 10% damage when fighting an opponent 10 levels stronger than you and higher. It crashes out at 30 levels above, I think." "You think?" Aiden cocked a brow. "You haven't faced an opponent higher than 30 levels before, I take it?" Valden snorted. Somehow it came out derisory, self-derisory. "Giant Slayer is the requirement to become a knight, Lord Lockhart. To become a knight of the crown, you need something else." Valden unfolded his arms and placed both hands on the railing. He leaned into them, and his face hardened as he stared out at nothing.
Aiden saw too much grief behind the man's eyes, because he wasn't looking at a knight right now. Right now, he was looking at a man whose experience had molded him, a man with an experience he would rather not have had. Aiden couldn't help himself. Unable to stop himself, he asked, "What do you require to become a Knight of the Crown?" "For that, you need a different title." Valden turned and met Aiden's eyes. His eyes were dark. His eyes were steel. "You need the title Inevitable." Not many people knew the title, but Aiden did. He said nothing, and Valden nodded. "You know it too," Valden said, as if he had been expecting it. Then he stared out at nothing once more. "You know too many things for someone that has only been here for a month, Lord Lockhart." Aiden stared down at the training ground. The people below were beginning to notice them. Trainings were beginning to slow as they all looked up one after the other. Valden chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Unfortunately, it was too strained, too forced. It didn't lighten the mood. Aiden knew what it took to gain the title Inevitable. He'd met a few masters in the Order with the title. Darrenet had also gotten it at some point in his past life. How continued to remain a mystery to Aiden. It was a powerful title, but Aiden wouldn't wish it on anyone, not even his enemies. While Giant Slayer required you to kill an enemy 20 levels higher, Inevitable wasn't just an upgraded version of it. It was a sadistic version of it. To achieve it, you had to defeat at least one opponent 40 levels higher than yourself, as well as 3 opponents 20 levels higher in the same fight, with a health stat of less than 20%. And all this was to be done alone. It was not a feat people set out to achieve. It was not a feat people were supposed to achieve. Such feats were the side effects of people thrust into horrible situations by fate. What did a man have to do to survive such a situation? "Do not pity me, Lord Lockhart," Valden said, his voice strong. "It is a part of my life, one that has passed. It made me a better man, a better knight." He paused. "Do you, perhaps, know the benefits of the title?" Aiden nodded.
A 30% increase in damage to all opponents with a higher level than the title holder, regardless of how many levels. 10% increase in damage given to all allies within a certain distance against opponents with levels higher than them. 30% damage reduction to all forms of damage once the title holder's health fell below 10%. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, a 40% chance of surviving a single killing blow. And Brandis has almost 200 such men under his command. How the hell did he not win the demon wars so easily? "So do not pity me," Valden repeated. "The gods blessed me with more than enough to compensate for what I lost." To go through such a situation, Aiden could not imagine it. But it was too high to be a requirement. It was literally suicide. "How does the crown have that many people?" he asked. What was the population of Bandiv? If he remembered correctly, it was supposed to be somewhere between 8 million and 10 million. Valden paused, then looked at Aiden like he was stupid. "Not all knights serving under the crown are knights of the crown, Lord Lockhart." Aiden paused. "How do you mean?" The sounds of clashing blades and arrows thudding into their targets was gone now. In their place was the silent rise of muttered conversations. "We have Knight," Valden explained. "And we have Knight of the Crown. These are 2 entirely different titles. One answers directly to the king and is above reproach by anyone, not even the queen. The other can be scolded by a noble should the moment deserve it." Aiden didn't know this. He didn't know any of this. He knew there were a select few amongst the knights that always rode with the king in battle,
but he'd thought they were perhaps the strongest of the knights, maybe the most loyal.
Aiden's mind went back to the ball, where he'd faced Jiang Su, and finally understood what Valden had meant when he'd said the advantage would have been skewed horribly in his favor if he'd fought. With the titles and the experience, it would have been unexpected of him to lose. Mind you, Valden continued, there still remain imbeciles who try to attain the position on their own. Oftentimes we find promising knights, or simple squires, or even soldiers, dead and desiccated in territories known to hold monsters with far greater levels than theirs. Aiden snorted and turned back to the training grounds. Well, that's stupid. It is, Valden agreed. Only a handful of those training were not looking at them. But I do not completely fault their stupidity. To be a Knight of the Crown is to hold the highest military power second only to the king. Apart from the king, only a more powerful may stand against an order you have given. And that rarely happens. Aiden squinted down at the men below. Was that? He really hoped it was not what he thought it was he was seeing. The title, despite giving you near autonomy, also comes with its own system benefits. Valden wasn't paying attention to their new audience. So yes, it rarely happens. It would be stupid to go through all that, gain the title, just to lose it over something stupid. Mind you, Lord Lockhart, despite the gravity of this specific requirement, it alone will not serve to make you eligible for the title. Neither will it guarantee you the title. The king gives, after all, and he also takes away. Blessed be the name of the king. It was a bastardization of a Christian line Aiden knew from the Bible, but it was a fitting response. With all these questions, Valden said, I must ask, do you wish to become a knight, Lord Lockhart? Aiden stood up straight and stretched, hands held over his head. Nope. He leaned back down onto the railing, and his eyes fixed on one of the trainees below. He didn't like the way the woman was looking at him. Knighthood is too grand a thing for a man like me, and I do not joke when I say that I am not worthy. Valden shook his head in disagreement. Every man alive is capable of being worthy, Lord Lockhart. Never forget that. That much was true, but something else was taking Aiden's attention away, and he did not like it. If it was what he thought it was that was happening, then this was a problem that just kept on giving. Sir Valden, he said slowly. Yes? By the virtue of being granted the title of knight, every knight gets their own company of soldiers to command, right? Right. The knights that are required to be at the palace at all times take a small number along with them, while the remaining are left behind. Left behind where? For knights who have their own land and home to protect, they are left there. For knights belonging to a family yet to have their own house and home and land, then they are left with the family. And what happens when such a knight has their title taken from them? Aiden asked. The soldiers and squires alike are returned to the home of the knight, pending redeployment in the event that there is no lord or knight that wishes to take them under their service. Aiden sighed as he got the answer he already knew. Which means that all of Derendorf's subordinates are currently being employed by the Naranov family, pending their reassignment. Valden nodded. That is correct. Aiden stood up straight and ran a hand down his face. Isn't that interesting? He was completely certain of it. The woman below was definitely giving him the stink eye, and so were a bunch of other trainees. Valden finally turned his attention to the group. Oh, took him long enough. Aiden almost laughed. Oh, is right. Would you like to train elsewhere? Valden asked. We could perhaps ask Lady Nella for a different location. I'm sure they would have something to accommodate us. Aiden waved the suggestion away. Nope, I'm fine right here, he said, then turned and looked around. How do we get down there? Twike throwing down the gauntlet.
For the next 2 days, Aiden had the most awkward training sessions he'd ever had the displeasure of experiencing. He trained under the attention of watchful, baleful eyes. He and Valden trained only their techniques with no skills, and the others watched them like hawks waiting for their prey to make a mistake. None of the eyes were directed at Valden,
And knowing what he now knew of Valden, Aiden didn't fear suddenly being jumped by many people during training.
Not all the soldiers showed such open hostility towards him during training, however. There were those that always kept to themselves, training and honing their skills in practice. Every now and again there was always a soldier a little too enthusiastic, willing to show off some powerful skill or the other. Aiden remembered the woman who led the League of Extraordinary Baleful Eyes, displaying a powerful striking skill with a battle axe any chance she got. It charged a deep blue blade of mana over the blade of the axe that was as long as almost 5 feet and fired it over a distance with a swing. Aiden thought it was stupid. It was a powerful technique, but it still remained stupid to display it so blatantly.
If you disliked someone well enough, the last thing you wanted to do was show them some of the things you were truly capable of, when you knew the both of you could come to blows. And Aiden had no doubt there would be blows on the training ground. He had met people like this multiple times, men and women with blind loyalty to their masters, subordinates who didn't care who was in the wrong or who was justified. They fixated on their superior's adversary and directed all their anger there. Coming to blows was inevitable, especially since every time he was about to leave, there was always someone who decided that they wanted to stab a training dummy in the chest with a sword and leave it there. Lord Naranoff finally appeared on their 4th day in the manor. It was late in the evening, and Aiden was doing his best to increase the mastery of his skills when a maid knocked on his door. Skill mastery could only be improved so much when it wasn't a foundational skill or a basic skill. There was a limit to how much a person could increase, maybe of skill mastery, from just swinging a sword or sparring with an opponent.
Sadly, most of Aiden's skills had reached that threshold. Aiden opened his door, ready to collect his tray of food, as House Naranoff liked to feed him so extravagantly, but was met with a maid and no tray. She bowed at the waist.
"Good evening, Lord Lockhart."
"Evening, Venice." For some reason, the very same maid that had shown them to their rooms on their first day was the one that always brought his food. Aiden had a feeling she had been assigned to him to deal with any requests he made. "I feel like I've been eating too much, and you've decided to put me on a diet, Venice." Aiden gave her a warm smile.
"Am I, perchance, being starved?"
Venice tilted her head up slightly to look at him, and he saw a touch of a smile on her lips. Aiden was a fan of those who worked servitude jobs.
While he would not claim that he made or had ever made close friends of them, he could say he always tried to do anything to make serving him even less uncomfortable. A joke, every now and again, was always good enough to make them less uncomfortable. "No such thing, Lord Lockhart," Venice answered, returning her eyes to the ground. "You know you can rise at any time, right?" Aiden bent at the waist so that he could meet her eyes, still smiling. "Or would you like me to bow with you?" Venice came up hurriedly. "I wouldn't dare, Lord Lockhart." Aiden wasn't sure if she was truly panicked, so he added quickly, "I was merely joking, Venice." "So what's happening today?" Hands placed gently in front of her stomach, Venice said, "Lord Naranoff has returned and wishes to have dinner with everyone at the dining hall." Aiden paused. He scratched his jaw in thought. "Just between you and I," he began with an awkward smile. "How do my chances of saying no look?" Venice smiled back. It looked more like a suppressed laugh, the beginning of a chuckle. "Abysmal." Aiden nodded. "I guess I'm having dinner with the Lord of the Manor."
Tonight was Aiden's first time in the dining room of the Naranoff family, on account of having all his meals in the room. Venisi always delivered them at every mealtime and came for the emptied plates when bringing his next meal. The dining hall was as large as could be expected. A chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting the room in blue light. Other bulbs hung from the walls, their lights dimmed to give some form of aesthetic appeal to the room. The dining table itself was large enough to host at least 20 people. It could hold more, but Aiden didn't do the pointless task of counting. All he knew, and was interested in knowing, was that the table was rectangular, covered in a fashionably designed tablecloth, white with golden embroidery, held a seat at each end of the table and at least 10 chairs on each side. There was a candelabra very close to both ends of the table, complete with lit candles, and the table was set for 5. Aiden was the last to arrive. Lord Naranoff sat at the head of his table. To his side, Princess Eliswit sat like a proper lady. To his left, Nella sat down like she couldn't be bothered. You could put her plate on the ground and she'd look more at ease. Beside her, Valden sat like a proper gentleman. Aiden took the empty seat beside Princess Eliswit. "Lord Lockhart," she greeted in a quiet voice as he pulled his chair out and sat. "Princess," he returned, "you have scarcely been seen since we got here." "That's balderdash," Aiden said as Valden touched the cutleries beside his empty plate, simply because he could, arranging what did not need arranging. "Venisi has been seeing me quite often. So has Sir Valden and a handful of squires and soldiers." "Well, I have scarcely seen you since we got here." There was a note in her voice that he was more than happy to ignore. Befriending a princess was proving to be an amusing thing. She was just a girl with female interactions when not in her official capacity, but she was also a princess. She was, arguably, always in her official capacity, and one needed to watch their words with royalty. Unfortunately, Aiden had a bad habit of forgetting people's capacity until he was reminded of it. "Well," he leaned a little towards her, lowering her voice, "if you've missed me, Princess, all you have to do is say so." Eliswit gave him a look with a raised eyebrow, and Aiden gave his words some more thought. "My apologies," he said. "That was corny and cocky of me. Won't happen again." Eliswit returned her attention to her empty plate. She adjusted her cutleries, though Aiden noted they didn't need arranging. "If you've missed me, all you have to do is say so. Really? What are you, the male lead in a corny romance novel?" Aiden fought back the embarrassed groan that threatened to escape him. When he raised his head to officially greet Lord Naranoff, he caught Nella staring at him and Eliswit. She pointed at the both of them with her fork. "And when did this become a thing?" Eliswit groaned like a tired older sister. "There is no thing," she said, matter of fact. "Nope," Nella shook her head. "There's definitely a thing." She paused, then gasped dramatically. "Has Princess Stone Cold made her first real friend?" Her eyes narrowed diabolically, and Eliswit shot her a glare. "I will have you know," she said, "that archer classes should not tease classes beyond their level of violence." Nella pouted and turned to her father. "Lord Naranoff, I wish to report a slight perpetrated within your territory." Lord Naranoff groaned and placed his head in his hand. For some reason, he looked like a stressed father of 10. "Please submit an official report through the official channels in 3 weeks, he said in clear reluctance. "Once the report has been reviewed, the House will get back to you in 2 to 5 business days." Aiden looked at Valden. When he caught his attention, he mouthed, "What's happening?" Valden shrugged, looking equally confused. Eliswit smiled, but shook her head. "Nella, you should really stop dragging adults into the matters of children." "Says the childish adult," Nella said. "If it were your house, you'd be reporting me to the king."
Lord Naranoff groaned again. This time, it was louder.
I feel like I've been transported 10 years in the past. Oh, come off it, father, Nella said, then twirled her fork between her fingers. You're enjoying the attention.
Lord Naranoff shook his head. I'm really not.
I'm really sorry about this, Lord Naranoff, Elaswit apologized, her tone official. I will do my best to keep my friend on her best behavior during my remaining stay here.
Lord Naranoff nodded in acceptance of the apology. Please do, he said. And if you can, teach her how to apply makeup like a proper lady. She has the dress code down. He gave Nella, who was currently dressed in pants and a shirt, a tired look. At least when she wants to. The makeup, I believe, is where her problems lie. I know my words will later come to bite me in the back, but sometimes I worry that the only men that will ever propose to her will be adventurers.
What's wrong with adventurers? Nella asked, petulant.
Aiden knew what was wrong with adventurers.
As harsh as it might sound,
Lord Naranoff said with a careful voice.
Nobility should marry nobility, and if they cannot, then they should marry one who is worthy of nobility.
And by that very logic, adventurers were out of the equation. Adventurers were more brute force and less tact when it came to most things. They were not political in nature. Swinging a sword at the problem was most often the better solution in their world than having a conversation, while it was the opposite in the world of nobility. Yes, Lord Naranoff was right. It was harsh. But should an adventurer lead a noble house, the other houses would eat that house alive.
I see your point, Lord Naranoff, Valden said.
Although it is no slight to their person, the average adventurer is not cut out for the world of a noble, as the average noble is not cut out for the world of an adventurer, Lord Naranoff replied. Vental is prim and proper, Nella said. Everyone paused, and Elaswit gave her a questioning look.
Vental. Vental is an exception to the rule, Lord Naranoff said to his daughter. And if I'm not mistaken, in his own words, and I am paraphrasing here, aren't you like a sister to him?
Nella pouted.
Only because he hasn't gotten to see me in a gown?
Aiden almost laughed. Vental sounded like an interesting man. Who would dare to friend-zone a daughter of a powerful lord in the kingdom?
Again,
Elaswit said, with as much politeness as her impatience could handle.
Who is Vental?
Some young adventurer my daughter has taken a liking to, Lord Naranoff answered. I must say I do like the young lad. He might have come from less, but he has the makings of a lord. Honestly, I would take him as a son-in-law in a heartbeat. Alas, my Nella is too much of a sister to him for that to happen.
I'll have him courting me before the year runs out.
I do not blame the young man, Lord Naranoff sighed dramatically, pretending to ignore his daughter.
He is too dashing a man, and the adventuring life is already stress enough. I would not wish the strain of a woman in his life when he can find a lady.
Elaswit chuckled in easy entertainment. Then she caught the look of amused confusion on Aiden's face.
This is entirely normal, she assured him. I used to come here a lot as a child.
She'd come here and have all the young boys blushing down to their necks at her beauty, Nella added.
And she was always so fun, not stuck up like her brother.
Elaswit laughed. How Deranet hated coming here. He always wanted to spend time going on father's hunts instead. Lord Naranoff scoffed. Bless the king for having a firm hand. The kinds of things your father hunts would kill his children by just being present. Aiden's mind went straight to the multiverse agent. Not for the first time, he dreaded his return trip through teleportation.
So true, Elaswit agreed. That said, I've spent more time here as a simple girl than I have spent in any other noble house as a princess. Lord Naranoff is like something of a favorite uncle. And that's why I remain confused as to why you have come to visit us as a princess without telling me why, Lord Neranov said. I promise you, Lord Neranov, you have nothing to worry about. Lord Lockhart is merely here to take on adventuring tasks to help foster his growth as an adventurer. My purpose here is for a vacation. Your documents say that you are here on official duty. Elliswit waved a casual dismissal. It's just a piece of paper, not even system-sanctioned. It was the only way I could take advantage of Lord Lockhart's use of the teleportation center, without making it seem like I wanted to simply follow the enigmatic young lord on some dashing adventure. I assure you that the King and Queen know I am merely abusing my office to take a vacation. Her words seemed to appease Lord Neranov.
And how long will you be staying? He asked. Elliswit turned to Aiden. For as long as he is, apparently, which shouldn't be too long. Aiden nodded. I have business elsewhere by the end of the new week, so I cannot dally for long. Well, if you need any help smoothing things over with the Adventure Society, just let me know. I will be more than happy to help. Lord Neranov placed his hand on a small napkin beside his set plates, and a small enchantment lit up in a soft green glow. Maids started entering the dining hall after that, pushing trolleys with covered plates of food. There were 3 maids in all, and they set the table, stacked it with each plate or bowl, then uncovered them. The room was filled with the sweet smell of meals of different kinds almost immediately. Aiden's stomach was pleased. When the table was set, the maids made their exit in equal silence, and they were left to serve themselves. Until then, Lord Neranov continued as the others began filling their plates, my training grounds are your training grounds. Some of the men present served under my son during his time as a knight, but were sent back home when he lost his title. So the few that are privy to what happened may not like you very much. Aiden nodded, remembering the uncomfortable attention they'd been giving him. I've noticed, he said. Lord Neranov shook his head in dismay. I hope they haven't done anything untoward. Aiden shook his head. Not at all. They just tend to go overboard with their training when I'm present. I believe it's some form of intimidation tactic. Childish antics. I'm more interested in what they do when I'm leaving the grounds. Now that I think of it, it seems ceremonial somehow. Everyone around the table had started eating by now. Aiden's plate was full, but he was yet to take a bite. And what is that, Lord Lockhart? They keep impaling their dummies with their swords. So far, there are currently 4 swords stabbed into one poor, defenseless training dummy. Aiden shook his head in mock dismay. I won't be surprised if there's 15 by the time I'm gone. Can a training dummy even hold 15 swords, I wonder? Everyone stopped eating. The room was heavily silent. Actually, Valden wasn't bothered. Aiden looked around. They were all staring at him, except for Valden, who continued his meal, unbothered. Just my luck, he sighed. It means something, doesn't it? It's not just some intimidation tactic. Lord Neranov nodded. It does. If I'm not mistaken, you are a weaver, right? I believe you made mention of it at the ball. I am, Aiden confirmed. And if it's all right with you, would you mind telling me your level? Aiden knew that it was impolite to ask another person their level unless in an official capacity. In this instance, he didn't mind. Besides, Lord Neranov had been polite about it. I don't mind. I'm level 14. A level 14 weaver, Lord Neranov mused. He turned to Valden. Yes, Lord Neranov, Valden said before he could say whatever he wanted to. His class is known for its non-combat use, even if Lord Lockhart has found a way to use it for combat. With that, his choice to ignore such gestures can be viewed, if brought to the public, as reasonable. Amongst the soldiers, it would be viewed either as cowardice or condescension, none of which matters. Some of those soldiers are squires who hope to one day become knights, Lord Neranov said. Some by title,
and some by class. Then that will be a problem for the future. And I assure you that it would be a problem Lord Lockhart will more than be able to crush. And I am yet to know what is happening, Aiden chipped in. Lord Naranoff turned to him. My apologies.
You said you are a son of some noble house that has refused to name itself.
I am. And prior to this you have known no noble culture or military culture. Aiden nodded. Correct. I am sure Sir Volden is unaware of what is happening, as I'm sure he would have told you. Oh, no, Lord Naranoff, Valden interrupted. I am very much aware of it. And you've said nothing. Correct. Why not? Nella asked. Valden did not turn to her as he answered. Lord Lockhart is quite literally above such petty squabbles, and I don't mean by his title as Lord. I mean by his capabilities as a man. And since he didn't ask, I saw no need to tell. Well, now he's asking, Aiden said. Lord Naranoff paused for a moment, looking to Valden. When Valden made no attempt to speak, he spoke. Their gesture is one done when there is an outsider amongst their ranks, he said. The nobles do it, and so do soldiers. At the end of an event, they take a sword or a spear or a knife, it could even be an arrow, and they stab it into the most human-like object present. The outsiders know themselves, and it can be viewed as an official challenge. Like throwing down the gauntlet, Aiden mused. Yes, but the gauntlet is more of an action amongst knights. No knight is so uncouth as to use this method. This is more for squires and soldiers and noble brats seeking a duel. So every sword currently there is a challenge. That is correct. All right, and let's say I do not know who put what sword where. How do I know what sword belongs to who? Lord Naranoff gave it some thought. In cases where the swords being used are not customized, they would inscribe their names or initials either on the blade somehow or on the hilts. Only fools would make such a challenge and not do that. And how long will the challenge stand? I can't be expected to believe that the sword will be there forever. It is customary to leave it until midday the next day, or until the owner of the territory deems it fit to remove the weapon. Valden waved the entire conversation aside. I say we leave them be. They are just children trying to do evil under the protection of culture. If any of them had the balls, they would make a move without waiting for a challenge. He has a point, Aiden agreed. But just out of curiosity, if I wanted to accept their challenge... Valden raised his eyes to meet Aiden's. I said, just out of curiosity, Aiden clarified. If I wanted to accept their challenge, I just had to pull their sword out, right? Valden was still staring at him. You pull their sword out and stick it in the ground, he answered slowly. Then you either wait or return before nightfall of the same day. In some cases, you could remove it and find the owner to hand it over personally. Aiden nodded. You all have strange cultures. No offense. None taken, Lord Naranoff said. You learn that the higher you go in a caste, the stranger the culture becomes. Aiden didn't think it was really about the higher a person went, though. The Order had a strange culture of their own. There was only one kind of challenge, and it was always to the death. But you had to be worthy to make the challenge. You would cut your palm and make your way to the person you wanted to challenge, and rub your blood down the person's face unhindered. If you were stopped even once before your blood got to their face, you forfeit the right to make that challenge. It was a barbaric culture for a place as civilized as the Order, and Aiden had only ever made a death challenge once. Valden was right. These were children playing children's games. It was also funny to realize that he'd already known of the custom. It was just some random piece of information in his brain that he never bothered to remember. To him, it had always been that unimportant. The rest of the meal was eaten in silence.
Mundane conversations were held, but mostly between the princess, Lord Naranoff, and his daughter. Everything else proceeded smoothly. When dinner was concluded, each of them returned to their rooms and turned in for the night. Lotwood had been a squire by class and title for 2 years now, and had been serving under House Naranoff's name for the same period of time. And in all his time serving, he had never seen something as stupid as what he was witnessing right now. It was early in the morning, just after the break of dawn. First light had pierced the skies, and every creature on Nustild, save the nocturnal, were rising from their slumber. And 8. The voice was simple and clear in its finality, but also amused.
It was like the owner was curious about something he couldn't even be bothered to think of as important. And that should do it. Lotwood watched as the visiting lord stuck the final sword in the ground, forming a ring of swords and 2 spears. Then he sat in the middle of the ring. He had officially accepted the challenges posed to him. All 8 of them. Chapter 27. Dangerous. The sun was up by the time the first person showed up. It was a young soldier from what Aiden could tell. He remembered seeing the man around a few times. Though he called him young, the man was probably older than 25. The man hesitated at the entrance, stunned. After a moment, he gathered his wits about him and went about his day. He cleaned as best he could, arranged as best he could. The man checked up on the dummies and the weapons, but made no attempt to get close to Aiden. Aiden didn't blame him. It was safe to say that none of the swords belonged to him, and he didn't want to have anything to do with what was happening. It was 2 hours past first light when everyone else started trooping in, and soon the challengers started to show themselves. It was in the scowls Aiden saw. Most of the soldiers scowled, but the challengers had a specific type of scowl. Somehow they managed to make it condescending. They looked like predators spotting a prey. Aiden sighed. How unfortunate. When even the armored trainees came in, Aiden finally got up. He stood in the middle of a ring of 6 swords and 2 spears and looked around at everybody. "Let me make one thing clear," he announced, drawing the attention of even those that wanted no part of this to him. "I am not a nice person. I am not kind enough to play games. By the virtue of these weapons, you have all made your decisions." You have challenged me, and not the other way around.
Mumbles rose slowly from the crowd, but one of the armored trainees stepped away from the section where only they trained. He wore light armor and no helmet. It seemed he was yet to put on his complete armor. "Silence!" the man declared. Everyone obeyed immediately. "He is the challenged," the man continued. "You may not like him, but you will accord him the respect due of the challenged." Aiden nodded to the man. "Thank you." "I did not do it for you," the man replied coldly. "I like nothing about you, but respect is important. Cultures must be respected." Aiden nodded. That was quite unfortunate because the man wasn't going to like what he was going to say next. "As I was saying," he continued, "I am the challenged, and that's fine and good. But I came here for my own reasons, and this little display of yours has chosen to delay my plans a little bit. That said, if I am forced to play your games, then you will be forced to play mine. I will face you to first blood, to surrender, even to the death." Aiden saw scowls turning into grins, feral smiles widening. One particular scowl turned scared, and the man paled. "However," Aiden went on, "I will do all this on only one condition. We will face each other without active skills. If you agree, then we can play this game of yours. If you do not, then understand that I will place all your swords and spears back in that poor dummy, and you can riddle it all you want.
and you will continue to be ignored until the day I leave."
"You cannot!" someone shouted from the crowd. "It is not allowed!"
Aiden snorted. "And yet I will." "You will go against culture," another asked, the voice feminine. "Your culture," Aiden pointed out, "not mine. Say what you want, but as someone famous once said, I'll do what I'll do, and you do what you can do about it. Now hurry up, make your decision, and let's get this over with."
"I have more important things to do than play these childish games." He stepped out of the ring of swords while the muttering resumed. He could hear the anger. Good. Angry opponents made mistakes. Unsurprisingly, the armored man did not step in to quell it, as he had done once before. Aiden didn't know if it was because the mutterings were necessary due to the need for deliberation, or because he was not going to ask them to respect a man who did not respect the culture. Probably the latter, he thought, as he picked up a sword from the training pile. He checked it as he waited. It was too worn out. He dropped it and picked another. It took him going through the process on 4 swords before he found something good enough. It could have been weighted better, but what the hell? Why not? Aiden turned away from the swords and walked over to a clear space. There had been eyes watching him through the process, and some of those eyes had grown serious. It seemed there were people who'd understood what he had been doing. He placed the tip of his chosen sword on the ground and started walking. It drew a line in the sand as he moved until he'd made a large and complete circle. When some eyes started glancing up, Aiden followed them. He was not surprised to find Valden standing behind the railing they'd stood to observe the soldiers on their first day here. Beside him, Nella stood with a puzzled expression. When Aiden was done with the circle, he stood inside it. A man walked out from the crowd and over to the ring of swords. He was around Valden's age, at least he looked it, and walked proudly. He pulled a sword from the ring and approached Aiden. He entered the circle Aiden had drawn, garnering everyone's attention. "I will face you with no skill," the man said, trying his best to glance discreetly at the range of the circle. "Don't mind it," Aiden told him. "The circle is meant to distract you and guide me. I hope not to fall outside it. Think of it as me challenging myself." He swung his sword in a single downward slash beside him. "Then I, too, shall not step outside this circle," the man said. Aiden would have mistaken it for some level of honor if he hadn't heard the tone of the man's voice. The man was condescending. It was unfortunate and didn't matter. Aiden was not honorable, and rarely was he fair. Everything was mind games. Knowing of the circle, the man would always have a portion of his mind on its boundaries. Aiden had angered them. Now he was distracting his opponent. When you faced uneven odds, you played every card to your advantage, just to be sure. "You will begin on my call," Valden's voice boomed over the entire training space. Whether it was because they knew who he was or because of Nella standing beside him, no one objected. Some of the armored trainees even straightened up, stood at attention. Valden placed his hands on the railing. "To what grounds?" Aiden asked. His opponent glared at him, condescending blue eyes focused. "The death." Aiden nodded. "To the death it is." "Begin!" The man charged forward, sword held low and to the side in 2 hands. He was fast, but not fast enough. When you wish to take the initiative and strike first in a duel, the takeoff in a charge was just as important as every other action. The man's takeoff had been poor. It seemed he had an active skill that helped him charge forward. Such sloppiness in a charged takeoff was only this bad if you relied on such a skill too much. Your body tended to forget how to do it properly without assistance from the skill. Aiden simply stepped forward. He felt himself ease into the version of himself that had once been an instructor in the order. He had been significantly more powerful then. But there were things that didn't change simply because you stopped being powerful. He leaned back on his first step and let the man's upward swing skim past his face. It had been designed to take his neck, and without hesitation. A death blow with a lot of power behind it. The man spun into the swing, exposed his back for a moment, before following up with another on his turnaround. The second attack was sloppy, and Aiden parried it easily, sent the sword skewing up and away. In return, he stepped forward and brought his sword down in a simple forward cut with both hands. The man hurried to block it. Caught in an awkward position, his defense was successful, but sloppy. Aiden followed up with a simple side slash as he stepped forward again, footing casual but precise. His opponent hurried to block that too as he took a step back. Aiden swung again, stepping forward with each swing. Head, shoulder, waist, stomach, head. Each swing was basic, simple. Each swing was powerful. It was always the first thing he taught new recruits. The basics were powerful. They were greater than what most people thought.
The trick to overpowering an enemy with the basics was to ensure that every swing, as simple as they were, was intended to kill. By the 8th deflection, his opponent glanced back, against his better judgment, checked how close he was to the edge of the circle, and that was the distraction. Aiden switched, swung his sword down with one arm this time. The man hurried to defend himself. Panicked by his distraction, he swung his sword against Aiden's with both hands. If Aiden had used both hands, as he'd been doing since the beginning of the fight, the blow would have been defended perfectly. But he wasn't. The man swung too hard, and while it deflected Aiden's blow, pushing his sword arm back, it left the man wide open. Aiden didn't worry about his sword. He kicked the man in the chest instead, and sent him falling on his butt and outside the circle. Aiden turned and walked back to the center of the circle. He stood there, sword held out to his side in one hand.
The tip of the blade tapped the sand slowly, and in a steady rhythm.
The silence of their audience was deafening. The man picked himself up and looked down at the scuff marks he'd left in the line of the circle as he'd staggered out of it. He looked from it to Aiden and back. Aiden said nothing. He allowed the man decide which one of his words was more important. To the death, or that he would not leave the circle. Everything is a game of the mind. Aiden saw when the man made a decision. His entire face squeezed in a scowl, twisted in anger. He hurried back to his feet and stepped back into the circle. To the death it is. He charged Aiden once more, sword slashes coming in a horrid flurry. Aiden did not retreat. He stepped into the attack, sword raised in both hands, deflecting each blow. The sounds of metal clashing filled the silent training ground. Anger fed strength, but it, most times, starved technique.
The man's anger fed power into his blows, certainly depleting his stamina faster until the man's attack slipped up again.
He broke his own flow in between combos, and Aiden stepped into it. He slipped into the man's attack on a downward swing, caught the swinging arm over his shoulder, and tossed the man over him with a shoulder throw. Aiden winced at almost nicking himself with his own sword. The man hit the ground with a loud thud. Aiden moved quickly. He stepped on the wrist holding the man's sword, and placed the tip of his sword against his neck. "Yield," he said. The man spat at him, which was stupid because the distance between them was a lot, and his spittle just ended up falling to the sand. "To the death!" the man ground out. Aiden raised his head to look at their silent audience, and the man moved. It was a simple twitch, cut off when the tip of Aiden's sword pierced the fabric of his shirt, and cold steel touched flesh. He looked back down at the man.
Yield. The man was defiant. Honor or pride, Aiden wondered. In the end, it didn't matter. He had been a good person once. Then his brother had left him, a kingdom had turned against him, and he had joined the Order. Aiden moved the tip of his blade to the man's shoulder, the one that belonged to the arm holding the sword. He drove his blade into it, slowly. The man gasped in pain. His free arm rushed up to grab the sword. The action moved his shoulder awkwardly, and Aiden watched the man's eyes widen in pain as he let out a pained scream. He did not stop pushing his blade. The man did not stop scrambling. He was raising dust. Eventually, he pushed through his pain and grabbed the blade of Aiden's sword in his hand. He tried to pull it away, and Aiden wondered how much faith the man had in friction. Too much was the answer. Aiden pushed his blade deeper. When the man tried to pull the sword out, test his strength against Aiden's, he only succeeded in cutting his palm and fingers on the blade. He let out another scream, releasing the blade. Aiden pushed a little more, and a notification flashed in front of him. "You have dealt a critical blow." At the same time, the man's eyes flashed to the air in front of him. His interface was probably alerting him to how much health he'd lost. Critical blows often took out a chunk of health. Aiden pushed further. He was making sure not to strike bone. "Yield!" the man bellowed. "I yield!" Aiden stopped. The blade was almost through to the other side. He drew his blade free and stepped away from the man. He checked his stamina. Stamina, 91%. Chances were the man's level wasn't that high. Maybe he should have asked for the average level of the people here. The man picked himself up, but his sword arm hung limp, and his sword fell from his hand. There was a small patch of blood in the sand, and now it dripped down the man's limp arm from the injury in his shoulder, soaking his shirt. The man looked at Aiden, then at his sword. His head twitched to the side, and Aiden noted how he refused to look at his comrades. He left his sword in the circle as he staggered his way out of it. Defeat and pain affected a person gravely, especially when they expected victory in its place. Aiden wondered how this would affect the man. Perhaps I should keep an eye on him. He walked over to the scoffed line of the circle and redrew it with the tip of his bloodied blade, then turned to the crowd. There were no sneers or scowls left. No one was looking down on him now. Next. By the fourth challenger, Aiden's stamina was at 62%. The entire arena was silent. The armored trainees watched with rapt attention as a boy younger than everyone present ran a gauntlet on those older than him. The fourth challenger chose until surrender, and surrendered after being forced out of the circle. Aiden had not yet used any complicated sword techniques. The basic sword movement of the Order was proving sufficient, even if it was taking more of his manner to win in the way he was with it. The sixth man was the first spearman amongst the challengers. There was a part of Aiden that wanted to face the man equally with a spear, but he wasn't so stupid. While the spear was a weapon he was capable of using, he did not have the skill. Challenging someone with their weapon of choice when you did not have the skill to back it up wasn't just hubris, it was stupid. It didn't matter how well he'd known the spear in his past life. Aiden just couldn't bring himself to that level of stupidity. The fight was a little tricky. The man employed the advantage of a spear's reach and had sharp and fast thrusts. Aiden had needed more than the basic sword skills to fight him. It had pushed his footsteps up a notch and forced him into more complicated techniques. The fight took far more stamina than the others had, and Aiden finally broke a real sweat. But defeat did not befriend him here. Valden and Nella watched in silence, even as he overpowered the man and dealt him a fatal blow to the thigh, rendering him unable to fight. When the man struggled some more, the butt of his spear pressed against the ground to help him stand. Aiden walked up to him and shoved him in the chest with his foot. Stay down, he told him in a calm voice. Every man should know when he's lost. You did not choose to the death, so I have no compunction to watch you bleed to death here. The man was helped out of the circle by 2 others and led out of the training area, most likely in search of a healer. Maybe it was from seeing Aiden work harder against the spearman, maybe not. But the next spearman was a little too cocky with his attacks.
It was not on the part of blatant carelessness, but it was enough to put him in trouble. At a point, the instructor and Aiden almost lost it at how many mistakes he was making with every stab or sweep, and he was tempted to humiliate the man for no more reason than humiliating him. But he did not. However, he ended the fight in a more disgraceful way than any of the others. He slipped through the reach of the spear, drew close enough to render the spear an uncomfortable weapon of choice, and knocked the man out with a fist to the face. He let the man fall to the ground in an unceremonious heap. Only 1 sword remained in the ground now as Aiden pulled up his stamina. Stamina 38%. It was low, but enough for 1 more person. A childish waste of time. That's what this is. He waited for a while, and when nobody stepped out to claim the sword, he asked, "Is that all?" It was midday, and the sun was bright in the sky, beating down on the world of Nastild. "Yes," a feminine voice answered. Aiden turned in its direction, and found the woman that had been displaying her axe skill any chance she had. "You use an axe," he said simply. "I do," she answered, defiance in her voice. "Yet you declare that this is all despite the sword in the sand. Am I to assume that it is yours, despite your favored use of an axe?" "I will not fight you without a skill." Aiden nodded. "Then you will not fight me at all." He drove his blood-stained sword into the sand, where it stayed, hilt pointing to the sun, and walked out of the training area. There were no words in his wake, no jeers or compliments, only silence. He did not have to look back to know that he had given every soldier there, squire or not, something to think about. He was weaker now, younger too, but experience had not fled him. Basic swordsmanship, mastery 59.00% to 61.06%. Unarmed combat, mastery 49.00% to 52.01%. Resilience, mastery 98.00% to 98.13%. Light steps, mastery 94.09% to 95%. At least the entire ordeal had not been a complete waste. Aiden read his notification as he stepped out of the entire training area and out into the open compound of the Naranov estate. The air here did not have the smell of blood and sand and steel and sweat. The entire encounter had increased his mastery in some of his skills, but not enough. It seemed his skills had reached the threshold of how much mastery he could pull out of them in situations that were not overtly stressful. Stress was the key word, and while what had happened inside the arena had been tasking, strenuous maybe, it was not stressful. There was only one surefire way left. No greater stress than something life-threatening, I guess. He was a good distance down the path back to the mansion when Nella and Valden caught up to him. When they did, Valden had only one thing to say. "That was brutal." Aiden wasn't too bothered by it. "They needed to learn," he replied. "Blind servitude is a deadly thing. Most people are blinded by their loyalty. Such things lead to the most unnecessary losses. It took the first man a while, but he finally realized that this was not a cause worth dying for." Valden nodded, but whatever was on his mind had gone nowhere. A cause worth dying for. He sounded very thoughtful, reflective. "I have no response to that," Valden said. "But one thing I can say for certain is that some of the people there now fear you, while others now respect you." None of that mattered. Aiden shrugged. At least they'll stop impaling that poor training dummy. Nella was still yet to say something, but she looked like she, too, had a lot to say. Her face was fixed in something thoughtful. There was also a dire touch to it. "Is everything all right?" Aiden asked. In her early 20s, he was sure there was much she had not seen. She might often hang out with adventurers, but he was certain the worst she had seen was monsters being monsters, or humans being humans.
He doubted she had ever gotten to see such a show of empty cruelty before. What he had done to the first man without batting an eye might have stuck with her. Nella said nothing. She continued to stare thoughtfully. Only when they reached the main house did she speak. Her words were precise, and her expression was torn between worry and acceptance. "You are dangerous, Lord Lacat." Chapter 28. Ask Me Why. House Naranov's mansion was not as quiet as most houses at night. The maids never slept, at least that was how it seemed, but Aiden knew better. The night maids were simply different from the day maids. But it wasn't the maids he had to pay attention to. It was the soldiers. At night they paraded the halls, keeping watch of everything that happened. There were also more than a handful that paraded the compound. Aiden stepped out of his room in his trench coat all buttoned up. On his hip was a longsword of the Nestild design he'd brought with him from the palace. He made his way on a simple, casual stroll down the hallway. Simple steps carrying him down a simple path. The maids, on about their business that saw him, spared a glance at his odd attire before their eyes moved to his swords. The swords were all the deterrent they need to resume minding their business. A lord out and about in the middle of the night carrying swords was rarely ever a good sign. He got to an intersection in the hallway and was about to pass when movement in one of the hallways caught his attention. Aiden stopped, turned to the closest maid cleaning a vase, and gestured her away. Confused, she looked from him to the vase she was cleaning. Aiden didn't want to scare the woman away, but he also didn't have the time that was needed to convince her carefully. So he met her eyes and tapped the pommel of his longsword suggestively. The woman's eyes widened, and she fled the hallway as quickly as relatively calm steps could carry her.
Now let's hope she doesn't interpret that to mean I need help and call a soldier.
Alone, he peeked around the corner of the hallway. At its end was a soldier patrolling the grounds. He had a longsword strapped to his waist and had an air of tiredness about him. There was a high chance that he would simply greet Aiden and be on his way, but Aiden didn't need anyone of any relative importance seeing him tonight. Maids were okay. They would talk, but only amongst themselves. Before their gossips would reach powerful enough ears, Aiden would be done with this place and be on his way. Until then. You have activated class skill Enchanted Weave. Constant practice paid off. Aiden's hands moved in quick succession, and the effects of an enchantment were already going through him even before his interface updated him. You have used Lesser Enchantment of Silence. His heart grew silent. Its beating became almost non-existent in his ears. It was a neat trick as far as he was concerned. A good substitute until he learned the stealth skill. He peeked around the corner again and saw the soldier pause to look at something. Aiden took his chance without hesitation. He cut across to the adjacent hallway and hurried his way down the path. Aiden had 2 rooms to check tonight, and if the results were promising, then his task tonight would be relatively easy. If they were not, well, his task tonight would be tiring. He did not use the enchantment of silence much as he skulked his way around the mansion. Sometimes simple, quiet steps were all it took to move past the guards.
By the time he got to his first destination, his mastery had increased. Sometimes Aiden wished skill growth in Nestild was the same way it was in video games. The moment you perform an act, you gained the skill. All you had to do after that was level up the skill. But on Nestild, you had to work for everything.
It's why normal people don't grow fast. There was some adventurer somewhere that had been adventuring for 30 years and still wasn't at level 50. It was a sad thing, though it was a normal thing for the indigenes of Nestild. Aiden dismissed the notification as he pressed himself against the wall beside Nella's room door. He knew Nella had a study, but from the little he'd learned about her these past few days, she didn't seem like one to take her study seriously. There was also the fact that he'd heard 2 maids arguing over who would clean her study. Both of them wanted to, since the lady of the house never used it, which meant it was never a mess. Aiden paid attention to the lock and activated a skill. You have used skill Detect. The information he was looking for came immediately. Details hovered over the doorknob. Basic lock. A basic lock designed by a smith to be unlocked from without or within with a key. You will need a key to unlock this door. Aiden scoffed the system and its many suggestions. A thief, or a rogue, would have seen a different suggestion. It didn't matter, however. Just to be sure, he placed his hand against the keyhole and activated Basic Enchant. He felt his mana pool out of him and into his hand. When it made contact with the door handle through his skin, it simply fizzled out. Skill, Basic Enchant, does not take effect. That was a good sign. It also said a lot about Nella that she didn't have an active enchanted lock. He didn't know if it was going to make things easier for him or not, but that was unimportant. He had come prepared for the worst. He squatted down to the level of the doorknob and went to work. He pulled out 2 thin strips of iron, commissioned before he'd left the palace for a task just like this. Sliding both inside the keyhole at different angles, he started to shake it about. 3 shakes in, he stopped. The task was getting loud, and loud was not a good thing. There was the possibility that it was all in his head, but he couldn't risk it. He released the pins and weaved himself into an enchantment. You have activated. When his hand touched the pins and he resumed his work, he barely heard anything. That was good. He'd learned since that any enchantment he was under from the effect of automatically extended to anything he touched. His shoes, his clothes, the swords at his hip, the pins for picking locks, and the locks by extension. Even if Nella was standing in front of the door, she wouldn't hear him working. He really hoped the information he'd gotten that said she'd gone out for an expedition as an adventurer and wouldn't be back for 2 days was right. The last thing Aiden wanted was to open the door and find her staring at him like some kind of pervert. After a moment, he felt the click he was looking for. He turned the knob gently and felt the second click. The door was open. A cautionary glance around told him that he remained alone. With the certainty, he pushed the door open and slipped inside the room. He retrieved the lockpicks before closing the door behind him. The first sight he was met with was a message from his interface. You have learned lockpicking. Mastery 0.02%. That's odd, Aiden mused as he dismissed the notification. Usually, his skills started at nothing lower than 0.10%, even if it wasn't all of them. But this was low, very low. Did I have the lockpicking skill before? He gave it a quick thought, and the answer came to him. He hadn't. Lockpicking was a skill that belonged almost exclusively to classes like Rogue and Thief. Enchanter and Weaver had no business developing such skills after gaining their class. Aiden dismissed his thoughts and focused on the attention at hand. Nella's room was, in a simple word, a mess. The bulbs were still activated,
and they cast the room in a soft blue light.
It was oddly funny how Nastila had created their own LED lights.
Aiden didn't know how it was funny, he simply found it funny. You don't get LED lights in fantasy novels now, do you? Nella's bed, at the center of the room, large enough to hold 8 people without complaint, was scattered. The yellow sheets were a mess, and the duvet was on the ground. Her pillows were littered all over the mattress. It was almost as if she'd been trying to sneak a lover out in a hurry so that her father wouldn't catch him. There was a massive curtain that covered an entire wall, and Aiden assumed there was probably one of those massive double doors that opened out to a balcony behind it, like the one in Brandis's study. He ignored it as he walked into the room, one careful step after another. The brown walls were unadorned except for the single portrait of a woman that looked like an older version of Nella that hung just above her bed. Probably Lord Naranoff's wife, Aiden thought.
He might have to find out how she died, just out of curiosity. Aiden spotted what he was looking for on the other side of the room and hurried over to it. Lesser enchantment of silence was still in effect, so his steps were muffled, almost non-existent. He couldn't help but smile at the fact that he had a substitute for the stealth skill. He crossed the room and made his way to the only reading table present. It had a reading bulb right next to it that was turned off. Lighting wasn't important right now. Besides, the room had enough blue light for him to see almost anything, even fine print. At least as much as a person could read with blue lights. On top of the table were 3 pens and nothing else. Far neater than the bed. Aiden ignored it and went for one of the drawers. Nella said her and her adventurers were currently mapping the cave, and that she had a copy of the place that was still a work in progress. Aiden wasn't hoping for a perfect map, just a framework he could work with. He pulled a drawer and paused. Does she have no sense of privacy? He wondered as the drawer opened. It was confusing to see someone of her status not lock her drawers or have an enchanted lock. I'll be happy to run into a booby trap at this point. He looked into the drawer and found it empty. A sigh escaped his lips. Go figure. He closed it and opened the next one. There were more pens, some torn-up pieces of paper, and some cosmetics. He picked one of the cosmetics up just out of curiosity. It was designed for powdering. On the east side of the room was an entire vanity mirror next to the wardrobe. It was complete with a small wardrobe of its own. You have got to be kidding me. The remaining drawers were basically the same thing. More cosmetics, some pens, and an arrowhead made of what he could only imagine was ivory. Things he felt belonged at the vanity mirror. If it's not in the drawer, where would she keep it? It was mind-befuddling. Aiden was beginning to come to the conclusion that there was likely no map in her room. Had he chosen wrong? Should he have gone to the study instead? His mind kept going through the possibilities. The study had always been his second option. Nella's room was only the first because of what he'd heard from the maids. Or maybe... Aiden went to the vanity mirror. It was a long stretch, but if Nella was keeping her makeup at the reading table, there was always the possibility that she was using the vanity for the wrong reasons as well. He went to the vanity. The third drawer opened up to a few folded-up pieces of paper. It was simply insane. Aiden found what he was looking for by the 5th folded-up piece of paper. It was a poorly drafted map, an insult to cartographers all over his world and Nastiled. It possessed nothing but lines, but Aiden had been in enough caves to know what an attempt at mapping one looked like. Careful not to make too much of a mess, he opened up the map in front of him. Let's see if your brain still works the way it used to, he told himself. It did, but not exactly the way it used to. It took Aiden almost 5 minutes before he memorized enough of the entrance to the cave to be comfortable. When he was done, he folded the piece of paper back up and returned it to the drawer and slid it shut. Sneaking out of the room was easier than sneaking in, so was avoiding the guards on his way out. A few stairs of sneaking around and a few hallways later, Aiden found himself at the hall downstairs. There, he discarded the entire demeanor of someone lurking around and strolled down the stairs like a young lord out and about, even at this time of the night. Standing guard at the front door were 2 soldiers. One look at them, and Aiden recognized them from the training ground. The moment they spotted him, they did the most ridiculous move of placing their hands on the hilts of their sword. Aiden cocked a brow as he approached them. "Really? It is the middle of the night, Lord Lockhart." There was definitely no respect in how the first man addressed him. "You cannot leave." Aiden took a casual stance and folded his arms. "By some chance," he said, "am I a prisoner in this house?" "You are not," the second answered, "but you cannot leave the house so late at night." Aiden's eyes went to the man's hand on his sword's pommel. It was casual, but his second hand, his draw hand, was anything but. In fact, it was twitching. "It is never a good idea to take a threatening stance against an opponent," he told them. "It makes you an enemy, and I don't take too kindly to enemies." The man that had spoken first drew an inch of steel free. "This is not some honorable duel, Lord Lockhart." "It is not," Aiden agreed, "and I didn't consider any of them an enemy." He didn't have time for this. If anything, he was supposed to be facing this level of problem at the gate. It seemed his small display at the training grounds hadn't done its job properly. Maybe I should have killed the first man. He shook the thought from his mind immediately. That was order thinking. Not everybody deserved to die because they were being stupid. "All right then." He shook out his hands. "Let's get this over with, and I can apologize to the lord of the house tomorrow." The second soldier looked unsure, his eyes glancing between his partner and Aiden. He looked indecisive, even as he reached to draw his weapon. "Lord Lockhart." Everyone stopped. Aiden recognized the voice. He did not take his eyes off the men in front of him as he answered. "Princess, is there a reason you are leaving without me?" The men in front of him released their swords, and Aiden turned to answer the princess, afford her the respect she was due, and stopped. Princess Eliswit was walking down the stairs, her hair braided back and wrapped around in a bun above her head. More importantly, she was wearing a vest and pants with combat boots. Behind her, strapped to her back, was a massive cleaver as long as a longsword. Why the hell was she dressed for an adventurer's expedition? "I forgive you," Eliswit said, taking advantage of his pause. "Sorry, what?" Aiden stuttered. "When a lord sees a beautiful woman, he is meant to compliment her on her beauty," Eliswit explained, as she got to the bottom of the stairs. "Her dress, her looks, at the slightest her massive cleaver. You have not. And you have failed, too, even after getting caught trying to abandon me when we've made plans. And yet, I forgive you." Aiden's brows furrowed. Eliswood gave him a soft pat on the cheek as she walked past him. Aiden struggled to calm himself as he grit his teeth. He reminded himself that he was a child, 19 years old, and the princess was older than him by at least 2 years. "You are not a 30-year-old man being patted on the cheek by a child." He repeated the thought twice before successfully calming himself. Besides, if he was a 30-year-old man living by the logic of his old life, the princess would still be older than him. Aiden turned to find Eliswit speaking to the guards. "Names, class, and levels," she said in a flat voice. "Princess," one of them began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. He was no doubt about to point out how rude it was to ask such questions outside of one's official capacity. Sadly, Eliswit did not seem to care for such decorum in this moment. "Understand this, soldier," she said softly. "Lord Lockhart is within this house based on a royal decree from my father, the king. This decree declares and commands that he is to be granted the highest level of hospitality. The fact that I have arrived here with him
should say much on that." She looked from one soldier to the other, met their eyes.
"Despite that, not only have you treated a lord, a man well above your station, like a prisoner, in a house where he has been promised the highest level of hospitality, you have also drawn your sword on him." "Princess," the guard had been hesitant to draw his blade, said hurriedly, panicked. "No swords were drawn." She met his eyes. "An inch of steel drawn is a sword drawn, guard. On a guest, and your superior by law of the crown, and without provocation. Now, unless you wish for me to inform the lord of this manor about this," she paused for dramatic effect, "your name, class, and level." "No tell," the guard replied. "Slasher, level 16. Elliswit turned to the second guard. "Baltada," he said, eyes turned down and a frown on his lips. "Knight, level 17. Elliswit scoffed in derision. "I will remember the both of you. Now open the doors.
Lord Lockhart and your princess have a task to deal with."
In a matter of seconds, the doors were open, and Aiden and Elliswit were walking out of the building. "It may seem mean to you," she told both guards as she passed them, "but you could have easily lost your lives today." Both guards kept their heads low. "Ask me why, Baltada," she instructed. Aiden watched the entire thing, unsure how to feel about it. "Why?" Baltada asked. "Because Lord Lockhart does not possess a combat class," she answered. "Yet at level 11, on no more than acting on custom, he bested a level 20 with a combat class. He has taken what life has dealt him for creation and domestication and turned it into something capable of so much harm. Remember that the next time you cross his path." With that, she turned and left. "Let us depart, Lord Lockhart," she instructed as she passed him by. Aiden followed, still unsure of how he was supposed to feel about what had happened.
He didn't have the words for what it was. Aiden and Elliswood rode in the midnight air, the Japat going through the city's back streets as fast as they could quietly manage. The rest of the ordeal at the estate had gone smoother. Aiden had intended on covering the distance to the cave on foot, but Elliswood had been against it. She'd turned them towards the stables and had gotten them 2 Japats. At the gate, the guards obeyed her every word. Elliswood was the princess of Nastield, and she knew how to use her power. "Do you disagree with the way I have handled this so far?" she asked him as they rode along the outskirts of the city. "Why would you imagine I do?" he said. "Because you have been quiet since we left the estate." "I have been quiet, princess, because I am not a man of many words." "You seem to speak enough when Valden is around, though." "Perhaps." Aiden directed his Japat into a sea of trees and down an inclining slope, and Elliswood followed behind him. She caught up shortly after, her Japat trudging alongside his. "You still haven't answered my question, Aiden." The strain she put on his name was indicative of the fact that he'd used her title instead of her name. It made Aiden wonder if she had known what he had come to the city for. She had, after all, told him to call her by name when they were alone or in the presence of Valden. Maybe she'd expected to be riding alongside him and Valden for this task. "Did you know what I wanted?" he asked instead. "How did you know that this would happen?" "I am my father's daughter," she said. "When someone in your position decides that they want to leave the comfort of the palace for some reason or the other, it begs the question of why. I asked around, and it wasn't difficult to learn that everything you've done since coming to my world has been in the name of power." Aiden grunted. It was the only response he could give as their Japats trudged across a small stream of flowing water. "So," she continued, when the sounds of splashing water wasn't in the air, "it was safe to say that a requested trip this far north was for power. Couple that with your uncanny display for possessing information you should not, I knew you were up to something." Aiden turned to her as he slowed his Japat.
She had been paying attention. "Did you put yourself up to this?" he asked. Elaswit laughed. "Now what would give you the idea that I didn't?" "First thing, Princess. It's Elaswit, Aiden. I do not possess an uncanny level of knowledge," Aiden continued without missing a beat. "I possess knowledge because I ask questions and I'm lucky. Second, despite everything I've done, you've never taken any interest. If you had, I would know. And third, this feels more political than direct. Direct is for you and your father. Your mother and Prince Derenet are the political ones, and since you don't listen to your brother, I'm inclined to believe your mom's the reason you're here. And my youngest brother," Aiden paused. "Vascott." He tried to remember what he knew of the boy. He knew what kind of person Vascott had become, but not the kind of person he was. It took him another moment to realize that Princess Elaswit was investigating, in a manner of speaking. "I have no idea," he answered. "I will tell you that I'm impressed you even remembered his name," she said. "Almost everyone ignores him." Aiden wasn't surprised. Everyone ignored Vascott. Aiden had certainly ignored him in his past life. "He's a part of the royal family," he said. "Everyone should know the names of the royal family." Aiden looked around, calculating how far he'd gone as they lulled back into silence. One of the pieces of information he'd gotten before leaving the palace was a map of the Naranov territory. If he wasn't mistaken, they were in the right geographical area. Why didn't I look at the map once more? "Where are we going, Aiden?" Elaswit asked, as his Japat marched in a circle. Aiden's head remained on a swivel, thinking. Would have been easier on foot. His brain worked better on foot. "If I said I wasn't going to tell you," he answered. "Will you turn back?" Elaswit snorted. "You should know me better by now." Aiden paused on his search and looked at her. "You do know that I've spent, in sum total, less than a day with you, Princess. And yet you avoid me like you know me and don't like me." Elaswit gave him a fake smile. It was oddly warm, friendly. Who would have thought I'd be friends with a princess in this life? "So, would you like a map?" Aiden paused. She'd had a map the entire time. He shook his head. Of course she did. He held a hand out to her. "Yes, please." She laughed and offered one to him, pulling it from somewhere behind her. It was rolled up. 3 soldier belts and no maps. You should rethink your life choices, Aiden. Aiden took the rolled-up map. My life choices are just fine, Elaswit. He unrolled the map, held it out in front of him, then frowned. Not enough moonlight. He rolled it back up and gave it to her. "What?" she asked. "You aren't going to tell me you've gotten it that fast." Aiden shook his head. "I didn't. There's not enough moonlight to see with." "Aren't there enchantments that give you the ability to see at night?" "There are." Aiden frowned, looking around once more. "But those enchantments are above my current level. I can't use them even if I wanted to." He turned, his Japat trotting along with him. After a while, he pointed. "That's east." Elaswit nodded. "Then that's north." He pointed again. Elaswit nodded. "Then," he pointed. "That's south." He turned and kicked the Japat into a trot. Elaswit followed. They rode for almost half an hour before Aiden found what he was looking for. He reined in his Japat and dismounted. Elaswit did the same. When they were done tying their Japats to a tree, she asked, "So where are we?" "The cave." "The cave?" Elaswit looked at him. "As in, the cave, the cave? The one Nellie's investigating?" "Nellie." "Nella Naranov. I call her Nellie." Aiden nodded. "Well, yes. Nella's cave." "Why?" "Because I'm trying to get a unique skill." "Haven't people been dying and getting missing in there?" There was a note in her voice. Aiden knew it well enough. It was fear, which wasn't illogical. He started walking forward, downhill. The forest grass was slowly being overthrown by sturdy ground. "You can always wait out here, Princess," he said over his shoulder. "I'll be out in a few hours." "You want me to stand out here in the open for a few hours?" She panicked, then rushed after him. "There could be other monsters out here." Aiden looked at the handle of her cleaver poking out from over her shoulder.
Aren't butchers supposed to be badass?
"Who said I'm a butch?" She paused. "It's the cleaver, isn't it?" she asked with a sigh. Aiden nodded. "It's the cleaver." Butchers were the most common class known to use cleavers in combat. They walked another few steps, still going downhill. The ground grew firmer with every step. Aiden kept his attention on the path around them, the trees, the small sounds of insects chirping, the life of the forest. Elaswit had a few things to say, all of them mundane. Aiden kept his attention on the task at hand. It was a little unfair of him, but now that he knew she wasn't here simply because she could be, he was keeping his replies close to his chest. Back in the palace, the others were most likely getting ready for their mock battle. He wondered if Leto had finally hit level 10, and what class he would have chosen. If there was anyone whose life he'd impacted intentionally in this timeline, even if it was in a small way, it was Leto. There was a part of Aiden that wanted Leto to be offered a class better than Thief. Eliswit realized that Aiden wasn't in the mood for much talking when she asked a question about him and returning to Earth, and he'd replied with a grunt. After that, she'd remained silent. When they got to their destination, Aiden stared at the entrance with a tired expression. He'd really been hoping, but hope wasn't always a friend. "So what do we do about that?" Eliswit asked. Aiden shrugged. "We continue with what I came here to do." At the entrance to the cave, 8 Japats stood idly. Some people were here. Aiden only hoped they were adventurers. If they aren't, you could just kill them. Or not. He hated when he thought this way. Chapter 29. The Cave 1. Inside the cave was dark. There was no bioluminescent moss or trickle of light from a localized ecosystem. It was simply dark. Aiden led the princess forward with slow steps. He kept his attention on the path with hands and feet, poking at rocks or elevated grounds, touching ridges as they moved. "Why didn't you bring a light?" Eliswit asked in a low, annoyed voice, though it was clear that she wasn't annoyed at him. Aiden shook his head, smiling. "Who said I didn't bring a light?" he whispered back. "That better not be a smile I'm hearing in your voice," Eliswit shot back. For some reason, Aiden was finding this conversation hilarious. He had a light, a single orb in one of the pockets of his soldier's belts. But he definitely wasn't going to use it now that he knew there were other people in the cave with them. Not for the first time, he wondered if they were going to be competition or assistance. Aiden preferred none. From what he knew of the unique quest, no group had ever been issued the quest. That was also why he had always intended on coming alone. Guided by what he remembered of the beginning of the cave from the map he'd gotten from Nella's room, he led them down a turn. It was tight, so that he and Eliswit practically had to shimmy their way through, him less than her, walking sideways one after the other. Aiden wasn't bothered as they came to a crossroad. Eliswit looked at him, dusting off her clothes. "Which way?" Aiden nodded left, then kept on walking. Going right would simply lead them in a loop and send them back to the entrance. The cave was like a natural maze after all. "How the fiddlesticks are you navigating this entire place?" Eliswit asked as they wandered on. "I can barely see you in this darkness." "With my hands and feet," Aiden answered easily. "Did you know, Princess, that if you do something like this long enough, you might get the compass skill?" "No, I did not." Eliswit didn't sound impressed by the piece of information.
The compass skill is the first step to learning the cartography skill. Aiden led them down another crack in the wall.
All cartographers have the cartography skill. I would assume they would.
And did you know that while expensive, maps grafted by adequate cartographers are rarely, if not ever, wrong?
Lord Lockhart, I feel like you are running up to a point here. Aiden wasn't sure, but Elliswit was beginning to sound out of breath. That wasn't supposed to be happening. He checked his stamina. Stamina, 99%. Was the princess's stamina poor? It wasn't unheard of for people to have surprisingly low stamina, but she was a butcher. Her class was supposed to have a sufficient amount of stamina. The point I'm heading to, he continued, is that did you also know that all maps drawn up with the assistance of the cartography skill are system-sanctioned maps? And all maps drawn up by cartographers have a system feature that allows you to read it even in the dark. Lord Lockhart, Elliswit snapped, you're getting quite talkative.
Get to the point.
My point is, why do you nobles not have maps drawn up by actual cartographers? Aiden's hands patted around a low-hanging rock, and he bent under it. Watch your head. Ow! Elliswit's voice echoed, and Aiden looked behind him at her. I said watch your head. Well, you said it a little too late. All right, just bend, love. I'm bending. Don't rush me. There was a pause. I hate this. This is not an adventure, Lord Lockhart. No one said it was going to be. He held his hand out to her. Give me your hand before you go bumping into anything else. He stopped when he felt her palm on top of his. There was a part of him that had been expecting her to protest. She was also right. He could barely see her in front of him. Lord Lockhart, Elliswit said with a touch of worry. Why are we stopping? Aiden wasn't sure how to respond. No reason. I just didn't expect you to obey so quickly. Her hand tightened around his. And I wasn't expecting to be called love inside a cave. So everything's right with the world once more. Aiden stiffened, and she laughed. I would just like to say that I found it cute, she added. Aiden grumbled under his breath. Why the hell had he called her love? Forget it ever happened, he said with a touch of embarrassment as he held her hand and continued forward. I can't really say I'm surprised, Elliswit continued. Considering the way you've been calling me lately, I think it was just a matter of time. The way I've been calling you, Aiden asked, confused. It was difficult navigating the darkness while holding on to her hand. How have I been calling you? I'm not sure, Elliswit answered. But since we left the estate, your princess has been sounding less like a title and more like an... I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is exactly, but I know it's been nice. Aiden frowned into the darkness. They were coming to the end of what he could remember of the map. How the hell has it been sounding princess is princess? Am I suddenly calling it wrong? Got it, Elliswit declared suddenly. It's been sounding teasing. Princess, Aiden said. Yes, Lord Lockhart. He could hear the teasing and the laughter in her voice. It told him that tonight was going to be a long night. You're holding my hand a little too tight, he told her. I know, she said, slightly embarrassed but not letting go. People don't know this, but I'm actually a little terrified of the dark. Aiden hadn't known that either. Well, you can think of this as training to conquer your fears. Elliswit gave no reply. She was silent for the next few minutes, and Aiden was beginning to wonder if he had said something wrong. You think, he thought as he started navigating unmapped territory. Maybe when someone tells you one of their fears, you console them instead of telling them to face it. But people had to face their fears at some point.
For Elliswit, this was the perfect place to face her fears. It made perfect sense. Yes, but you don't say that immediately. You empathize first, then offer it up as a suggestion. Aiden frowned. Great, now I'm disagreeing with myself. Aiden? Aiden stiffened a little. The tone of Elaswit's voice was serious. Yes, Princess? May I ask a personal question? If I say no, will you still ask it? I will not. There wasn't really much about Aiden's life that was very personal, so he didn't see why not. Sure, he said. You can ask. Did you have a girl you were courting back in your world? She asked. I mean, do you have a girl you were in a romantic relationship with in your world? Aiden took a moment to think about his answer. It was funny how Aiden's mind went to the 3 women he'd had relationships with in his past life before settling on Tasha, his ex, the actual only girl he'd dated that was from Earth. I did not, he answered. That was a significant pause, Elaswit noted.
Aiden could feel a touch of breeze against his skin now. There was a draft, which meant that there was an opening somewhere nearby. It was a pause because it seemed like a heavy answer, he said. Now pay attention. We're going to be moving faster. I don't want you running into anything. Yes, love, Elaswit teased. She wasn't going to let him live that down, and Aiden just knew it. He followed the draft, hand patting against rocky cave walls as he moved. It was very likely that the cave walls had markings for directions, but they were useless to him this dark into the night. Why? Elaswit asked suddenly when the draft was getting more noticeable. Why what? Why didn't you have a romantic other? Because I didn't. Her questions were making him remember Tasha more, and it was slowly annoying him. Tasha had been his friend. They'd been close. A true friends-to-lovers young adult story. He still couldn't understand why she'd kept on making moves on Ted. Even now, so many years later, when he thought of it with an objective mind, he still couldn't make heads or tails of it. Did she even miss me? He caught himself wondering. I know I broke up with her, but 11 years was a long time to miss someone that broke up with you. But now that he thought about it, there was a very minute part of him that wished she'd missed him. There was a part of him that missed her. Not the girlfriend, but the friend. You're quiet again, Lord Lockhart. There it was again, the teasing tone. Aiden still wasn't sure how he felt about it. Was the princess flirting or just teasing? Yes, he answered. It's what happens when I do this thing called thinking. Maybe Valdan was wrong then, Elaswit said. Maybe you aren't mature. Maybe you're just silently rude. It can sometimes be mistaken for maturity in the young. Aiden paused. She was right. He'd been a little rude to her tonight. But that was only because he had wanted to come on this task alone. That and the fact that he wasn't accustomed to long conversations about his personal life. But it was no excuse for rudeness. It was a reason, but reasons were not automatically excuses. That he had a reason for doing something did not justify it. I'm sorry. The words left his mouth reluctantly. One more time for the beautiful lady in the back, Elaswit said, smiling. I said I'm sorry. Now can we play the quiet, no-talking game? I think I hear voices. Aiden also saw light. He led them slowly around a corner, and they saw something he did not expect to see. Just beyond them was a clear and open space. It was covered in grasses and wild plants, with a clear blue pond at the center. Bioluminescent plants filled the place with light, and concentrated moonlight streamed in from a high opening that Aiden couldn't get a look at without entering the open space. The ray of light reflected off the pond to give it a soft, bluish visage. The plants were colorful, red, blues, purples, and yellows. It looked like a meadow right out of a fantasy story. I guess I was wrong about the lighting, Aiden thought, as he eased himself down to a crouch behind a large rock. He pulled Elaswit down with the hand she was still holding, and gestured for silence with a finger to his lips. The meadow wasn't the only thing that was present, though he couldn't really call it a meadow. There were voices, too, and they echoed with every simple word they spoke. Unfortunately, Aiden recognized one of the voices. "I swear," the female voice said, "this is getting more annoying each day." Elliswit's grip on his hand tightened, and he nodded. Nella and her team were currently investigating. Nella turned and kicked a large piece of rock that came up to her knee, not for the first time. They'd been going in circles since the afternoon, when the light streaming in from the high opening was sunlight yellow. Now, it was moonlight blue. And where were they? Nowhere better. At this point, she could make her way back to this little oasis with her eyes closed. All right, maybe not with her eyes closed, but she knew at least 8 different ways to get to this place. "You're going to have to calm down, Nella," Ventel said, his voice soft and smooth. "I say we regroup and come back later." "I agree," Trunid said. He was a short, burly man, heavily bearded, whose primary weapon was an axe. He wasn't so short as to be called a dwarf, but they often teased him about having a distant relationship to the dwarven race. "I've been out all day," he continued. "What I need is a bed and a good rest." Nella shook her head. "The problem is right here." She stamped her foot on the ground. "This entire place is a complete antithesis of everything we've seen in this cave. The solution to our problem must start from here." "Then we go home, clear our head, and start again," Ventel said.
The cave will still be here when we come back. But some fool could just as easily wander in and get lost, or die as far as we know.
"Which is the odd part about this entire thing," Chelney said. She was the ranged support of the team. Her class granted her the ability to use spells. "Every time we come here, we find at least one dead adventurer's body in one of the tunnels, but never any monster." "And no one's seen the kind of creature that's killed them," Nella groaned, then sat on the ground in resignation. "Never seen talon marks that precise," Fulna said. Fulna was the party tracker and their walking bestiary. There was no monster indigenous to the levels below 100 that he didn't know. At least, none native to Bandiv. It made Nella consider the possibility that some kind of migration had somehow occurred. Not for the 3rd time she pitched the idea to him again. Fulna shook his head. "I get that we're basically on the outskirts, but monster migrations aren't that simple.
If some new species somehow migrated all the way here,
someone would have spotted them long before they got to the cave." "My worry is that it's not attacking us," Chelney complained. "At this point, I'll even fight a monster I know will kill me just to have something to do." "The lassie's right," Drunid said. "This be the most boring adventure I've ever had." "This isn't an adventure," Nella scowled at the both of them. "This is an investigation to keep adventurers alive." "Adventurers die every day, Nella." Fulna tossed a rock into the pond. "It's basically the life we've chosen." The rock dropped into the pond without a sound. "Can you please stop doing that, Fulna?" Chelney said. "It's very disturbing." "What? You don't like the way I throw—" "It's the water, asshole," Drunid said. "Stone shouldn't enter water without making a sound. It's just wrong." "You want to know what's wrong?" Nella picked up a small pebble. It was smooth and clean. "This entire place. It's too perfect."
then there's also the monster.
"What about the monster?" Chelney asked. "The fact that it's attacking adventurers but not attacking us is a problem," Ventel said. "It means that it's picking its prey." "Which implies some level of intelligence," Fulna added. Drunid turned and spat in the grass. "I hate intelligent monsters. Arseholes, the lot of them." Nella looked up at the opening and frowned. She could see the moon looking down at them, but it was too clear. It was almost as though if she looked hard enough,
she could see its contours. Her class, Archer, gave her perks that helped and skills that helped those perks. For instance, Precision Sight helped her focus on a target without losing it, even if it wasn't stationary. When the skill was in an active state, her attention on her target was practically automatic. Its passive effect, however, allowed her to see better when she focused on something. But by the life of her, the moon had never been this clear in her life.
It was as if this place was the closest to the moon she'd ever gotten in her life, which was completely false. The answer's in this place. It's got to be. The mana was too clean, the air was too fresh, and when Drunid drank from the pond against everyone's insistence that he not do something so foolish, he called it the most watery water he'd ever had the pleasure of tasting. Nella looked around again and was sure of it. The place was too perfect. That alone was a sign. The second sign of its importance was how most of the cave paths somehow led back here. She refused to believe it was a coincidence. The real issue, however, was the single spot in the entire place that felt so horribly eerie. She turned to Ventel. "Any ideas on the bad feeling we keep getting?" Ventel moved his attention to a wall. It was covered in green grass as high as 7 feet, just like all the walls in this place. He shook his head. "Nothing." Fulna walked up to the wall and placed his hand against the grass. "Yep, still does the same thing." Nella wasn't surprised. Anytime they touched the wall, their interface lit up with their mana stat, and they couldn't dismiss it. For the duration of their hand being on it, their mana percentage would just keep fluctuating, rising and falling. It was the same with all of them. Another thing that worried Nella was how they were yet to come in contact with any demonic mana. She knew her party wouldn't recognize it if they saw it, but the reports of adventurers that had survived described it perfectly well. But it had also been more than 10 days since the last report. What was the possibility that something had absorbed all the mana? It was a terrifying thought, since the only known creatures that could absorb demonic mana were found in the scriptures and legends. They called it demonic mana because the scriptures described it as the type of mana demons and the demon kings to ever walk the face of Nestild used. It was powerful and destructive, and whenever it started to rise on Nestild, the demon king would rise with it. At least that's what the churches say. "I still say we should leave that wall alone," Drunid said. "Those cracks running all the way up it are definitely not safe." Drunid was right. From under the luscious green was a crack that began to spread and branch out the moment it rose out from under the grass. It was as large as a hairline fracture and spread like the roots of a tree until it rose as high as the eyes could see, covering the entire wall. Fulna stepped away from it. "Do you know what annoys me most about it?" he asked no one in particular. "That it's got more class than you," Chelney chortled. "You're always a child," Fulna said, shaking his head. "What annoys you about it?" Nella asked. If they allowed Fulna and Chelney go at it, they could be here for another full day. "It's the notification I get whenever I remove my hand." "The one about the feature," Fulna nodded. "It keeps saying I do not meet the requirements to access the feature." "Which means what?" Velnut asked. "You lack a skill? You're not the right class? Your stats are not sufficient?" "Probably the first one or the last one." Fulna scratched his head in annoyance. "Seeing as you people don't get the same notification, I'm sure I've got the right class. It's probably the skill that I don't have, or the level." "And it's clearly not magical," Drunid said. "If it was, Chelney would get a notification too." Fulna groaned in frustration and scattered his hair violently. "Fuck it. I'm going home. I hate not knowing. I say we brainstorm on this and let the Adventure Society know when we come up with an answer. Until then, I need to sleep." Velnut walked up to Nella and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I agree. We should all go home and return when it's bright and clear.
Nella grumbled something incoherent, but couldn't argue the fact. Her eyes were already groggy.
What do we do about the spare jetpats outside? Drunid asked.
I say we sell them, Chelney said, a little too quickly. We didn't find their owners, so I say it's safe to assume they're dead. No need leaving them out here. Some creature will just eat them. There was a small argument over the matter that Nella was not a part of. Drunid thought Chelney was nothing but a dishonest, conniving thief, and Velnet, ever the honorable one, thought they should return the jetpats to the Adventure Society, since there was a high chance that they belonged to adventurers. In the end, they left the clearing with no more answers than the ones they'd had when they went in. The journey out of the cave was simple. They'd traversed the cave enough times to know which way to go, and not to go, even in the dark, and it didn't take them long to find an exit. "Did you guys notice anything at the pond?" Chelney asked when they were outside. "Like your thieving tendencies," Drunid sneered.
Suck it.
She made an obscene gesture at him. "I'm talking about when we were leaving. It felt like we weren't alone." "It always feels like you're not alone in there," Fulna said. "Try not to think about it." Effect: 15% nullification of sound made. Duration: 000,000 has elapsed. Aiden released his breath and turned to Alaswit. "Are you all right?" he asked her, genuinely worried. She was breathing too hard. He'd had to activate the weaving and grab her hand to mute the sound of her breathing so that they didn't get caught. Alaswit nodded, then audibly gulped in some air. "I'll be fine. It's just the darkness. It makes me claustrophobic." So the panting wasn't because of her stamina. Aiden paused. "Wait. You get claustrophobic in the dark and you begin to hyperventilate." She gave him a weak smile.
You could say that.
"And you still entered a cave with me. I knew I'd be fine." Aiden didn't know if he should be impressed that she'd gone on for so long in the dark, despite her reaction towards it, or to be stupefied at the stupidity of the decision. You were the one that wanted her to face her fears, though. Aiden frowned. They were still holding hands, and he released her as he walked into the lit clearing. The moment his feet touched the grass, he knew exactly what Nella and her team were talking about. A single breath of air felt like food for the lungs. And the mana. He could already feel his body regenerating the mana he'd used for the lesser weave of silence. That was enough to confirm his suspicion. "Wait there," he told Alaswit, pointing at a large rock. "Sit there and don't touch anything." Alaswit frowned, but obeyed. "You know the entire kingdom would lose its mind if they found out you were ordering their princess around like this." Aiden snorted. "They'd lose their mind if they found out their princess was sneaking about in the middle of the night." He walked in the direction of the wall Nella and her team had referred to as eerie. As he approached it, Alaswit was saying something about how sneaking out in the middle of the night was not new amongst noble blood. Aiden didn't care about any of that. Instead, he was more focused on the crack in the wall. He leaned forward, studied it. It had a pattern to it. A single hairline crack sprouting from beneath the grass, branching out and about. There were smaller cracks in between some of the lines, almost imperceptible with the moonlight, but Aiden saw them. He moved closer, almost placed his eyes on top of one of them. "Don't go blinding yourself." Aiden started, almost letting out a surprised yelp. He turned to find Alaswit standing behind him with an innocent expression. "How the hell did you sneak up on—" Aiden let his words trail off as the answer came to him.
You have the stealth skill.
"Uh-huh," Alaswit nodded. "Almost everybody has the stealth skill, Lord Lockhart." Aiden's brows furrowed in a frown. "Didn't I tell you to sit over there and not move?" "You did," she agreed, then shrugged. "Unfortunately, I'm a princess. I've been spoiled all my life, so now I'm stubborn." "Not stubborn enough, apparently," Aiden muttered, returning his attention to the crack, fascinated. You sat down in the beginning. So what is it? Elaswit asked. You look like you found something. I believe I have, but we'll have to wait quietly for a while before I can confirm it. Why? Because it might be dangerous, and I don't want your friend and her group busting in here and getting caught up in it once I confirm it. Are you sure you won't need more hands? I'm sure. Now go back and have a sit while I confirm that this is what I think it is. Elaswit gave him some space, but she did not sit down. Aiden paid it no attention. He was used to being the leader of his own groups, and giving out orders to people who were more than happy to obey. Now he had to remind himself of the fact that his life was not that way anymore. He took his time studying the cracks in the wall, peering in as deeply as he could at the lines and cracks. It didn't take him long to confirm what he wanted to confirm. Fascinating, he muttered. So this is why people rarely ever solved it. What's fascinating? Elaswit asked. Aiden held his hand out to the crack, but did not touch it. Do you know what an array is? Orders and patterns. Simplistic, but correct, he confirmed. Now, have you heard of natural arrays? I'm guessing it's arrays, but in nature. Also correct, Aiden said, a smile touching his lips at the sight in front of him. He'd only ever seen a handful in his life, and the enchanter in him was bursting at the seams with excitement.
Did you know, Princess, that most of the things humans create, technological and magical, are inspired by things in nature?
Elaswit folded her arms. I guess. In my world, humans created planes to fly because they saw birds flying in the sky. We rode horses, then built carts, then created cars so we could cover long distances. We once lived in caves, so we built houses for convenience. We drew pictures and made art because we saw amazing sceneries and wanted to take them home with us or appreciate their beauty. No idea what a plane or a car is, but okay. I got the horse and the cart, though. Elaswit sounded fascinatingly bored. I believe you're getting somewhere, though. Most people don't know it, but in your world, humans have learned to use magic from nature as well. They watched and learnt and recreated. Aiden paused, suddenly apprehensive. I need to see how far this goes. I need to see all of it. Aiden stepped away from the crack, looked around the wall.
When he found grooves he could use, he started climbing, studying the cracks as he ascended.
Humans are the greatest innovators and the greatest imitators, he continued, the higher he went. They find beauty in anything and imitate it. Then, from their imitation, they innovate. A rhinoceros has a horn that pierces, so they create implements that pierce so they can kill. Then they learn that they don't have to get close to kill with these implements, if they can simply throw it. Imitation begets innovation. Aiden paused at a certain height, a wide smile on his face. What have you found, Lord Lockhart? Elaswit asked from her place on the ground. Her voice echoed throughout the pond. The source of human imitation, he answered, then began his descent. When he hit the ground, he dusted his hands. You've said everything, Elaswit told him, and yet you've said nothing. Aiden turned to her. Humans learn from the world, Princess. You get your spells from nature. The lightning in the sky,
Volcanic eruptions, the rain. You study the process, feel it, then emulate it. He laughed in excitement. This! He turned and gestured at the entire wall. This is where you get your enchantments. They are rare and few between. This, dear Princess of Bandiv, is a natural array of a grandly magical nature. This is a natural enchantment. A moment of silence settled between him and her. At the end of the moment, Elaswit cocked a brow. You're a nerd, aren't you? Aiden snorted. No, he stuttered.
No, I'm not. Elliswit placed a hand on his shoulder. It's all right if you're a nerd. Some of us have to be nerds so the rest of us can be cool. Aiden sighed. Whatever. All I'm saying is that the reason for all the confusion is because nobody recognized this wall. There's probably a smaller number of people than you can imagine that can identify a natural enchantment by sight. If that's the case, why hasn't anyone noticed it until now?
You can't tell me all the adventurers are stupid. Aiden shook his head. Not at all. It's a natural enchantment, which means it grew naturally and over time. The right cracks aligned themselves as they grew until 1 in a million chances of a pattern was created to form the enchantment. For all we know, it could only be a few days old or a few weeks old. I'll need more time and tools to figure that one out. You're making enchantments sound far more complicated than they are. Aiden laughed. She had no idea just how complicated enchantments could get. The enchantments most people used below level 100 were child's play. And you weren't a proper enchanter until you were enchanting in the level 200s. So how do we activate it? She asked. The right way. Aiden rubbed his hands together. I bet we'll find a bunch of enchanters on the other side of this wall. He placed a hand on it, and, true to the words of Nella's teammates, his mana percentage fluctuated.
Mana 92%.
Mana 98%. Mana 86%. Mana 91%. He frowned at that. That wasn't an effect of a natural enchantment. There was only one thing that caused mana fluctuations of this level at lower levels. His mana stat would normalize eventually, though. But from what he knew, the normalization was a characteristic of beings summoned. Their mana adapted to demonic mana effects quickly. I guess they were right. There's demonic mana behind this wall. And the natural enchantment was keeping it trapped inside. It was as if nature was somehow protecting itself. Aiden's interface flashed in front of him. You meet the requirements to use this feature. You have discovered your first natural array. A sharp pain pierced Aiden's heart, and his legs almost buckled beneath him. Error! 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 You have not discovered your first natural enchantment. You have encountered a natural enchantment once before. System repairs recommended. Prisoner number 2345023857339. Stand by for system repairs.
Pending system repairs in progress. System repairs 02.00%.
Aiden looked at the new notifications and frowned. Ever since spotting his first monsters in this timeline, the system repairs was only at 2%. At this point, he had a feeling repairs would be taking place forever. Are you all right? Elliswit asked. Aiden nodded. Just some issues I'm sorting out. He returned his attention to his interface. New messages popped up. Would you like to activate Natural Enchantment Cavernous Guide, YN? There was only one answer to the question. His study of the natural enchantment proved, on a surface level, that all it did was cause rearrangements on the level of the cave. He didn't know how long exactly, but he knew that for at least a day, the cave would revert back to its original layout. It was magic on a legendary level. Yes. Skill, Basic Enchant, is in effect. Aiden felt his mana drain out of him as its percentage took a nosedive.
Mana 92%.
Mana 72%. Mana 61%. Mana 39%. Mana 21%. The drain didn't worry him. The only danger surrounding harmful natural enchantments was the fact that during its activation you couldn't use any mana skills, and it was arguably dangerous to terminate the process before it was complete. The cracks in front of him lit up in blue lights, and he caught Elliswit staring at it in awe. He couldn't blame her. All the cracks and patterns lighting up were truly beautiful. Once the enchantment was properly activated, the natural array would return his mana back to him. You have activated Natural Array Cavernous Guide. That's neat, Elliswit said suddenly. I just got the quest.
It's a unique quest.
Aiden's lips pressed in a thin line. He'd really been hoping that wouldn't happen. Worst case scenario, he was hoping it would be like some kind of shared quest where they'd both get the reward at the end. I guess I'll just settle for killing more monsters and leveling up, he thought.
I really hope there are monsters.
Eliswit frowned. Aiden, I think there's a problem. Aiden kept his hand on the wall as he looked at her. He found her staring at the empty space in front of her, most obviously her quest. What's wrong? He asked with a touch of worry when he saw her face. She looked terrified, as if her worst fears were about to eat her alive. Pale-faced, she looked back at him with the same terror. It's asking me to kill gargoyles. Well, that's definitely a problem. Aiden knew gargoyles. They were nasty things, and they weren't supposed to show up in Nestild for another 2 years. None was supposed to be less than level 42. Why the hell are gargoyles showing up now? The creatures were quite literally the first advent of the Demon King. Does that mean the Demon King is going to show up earlier? Panic warred with logic in Aiden's head. Is Ted going to be the Demon King sooner than I thought? Aiden? Eliswit's voice pulled Aiden from his thoughts.
What do we do?
She asked. Aiden didn't know. For now, he had to help her with the unique quest. Unique quests weren't quests you just abandoned. You had to either fail it or complete it. Abandoning them could have a great variety of consequences. In this case, the gargoyles could probably invade the Naranov territory, and since no one had fought gargoyles in forever, there would be significant casualties before there would be victories. A new notification flashed in front of him, and he realized they were in deeper problems than he thought. You have triggered a unique scenario. Unique scenario, Advent of the Demon King 1. You have found the first known point of invasion of the Demon King into this world. The young followers, eager to make a name for themselves, have found their way into this world ahead of time. They are paving the way, raising an army. Vanquish the early signs of the Demon King's arrival before it is too late.
Scenario objective: defeat Gargoyle 018.
Scenario objective: defeat Gangnar the starter. Reward: unique skill. This was a problem. Chapter 30. The Cave 2. Aiden remained unsure. One did not simply walk away from a scenario or a unique quest. He turned to Eliswit and scratched his head. I triggered a scenario. What does your quest say specifically? He asked. I could just show you, she offered. Before Aiden could reply, not that he was going to, an interface appeared between the both of them. It displayed the entire quest Eliswit had gotten. You have triggered a unique quest. Unique quest, World Healing. You have found a unique point hidden behind a natural array. Beyond this point lies dangers and perils that continue to wound your world. Exterminate these problems, and buy your world the time to heal. Quest objective: defeat Gargoyle 031. Reward: unique skill. Accept YN. It sounded simple enough as far as it went. There was no mention of demons or invasions. That was a good thing. But she was required to kill more gargoyles than Aiden was. Aren't gargoyles mythical creature? Eliswit asked. They went extinct ages ago, before my great-grandfather. Yes, Aiden agreed, still thinking. And they are mentioned quite often in your holy books. Nasty things they are. Skin capable of turning stone-like. Noses that can smell blood from a mile away. Claws that can cut through stone. He frowned as he listed some of their characteristics. Still, gargoyles were only troublesome to people who didn't know how to fight them. But don't you think 31's much? Eliswit asked. Maybe.
Aiden remained standing in front of the entrance, while Elliswit remained beside him as her interface faded from between them. They were going to have to tackle this very problem. Together, preferably. Again, unique quests and scenarios were not things you simply walked away from. No, Aiden thought, remembering the rules of quests and scenarios.
Scenarios were what you couldn't turn away from. They remained active no matter what happened, and you didn't get a choice on whether you wanted to do them or not. They happened, and that was it. A notification of a scenario wasn't an offer. It was simply a notification. Your interface telling you that something was happening, that you had stumbled upon something. Quests were different. They were not evolving. You could leave them how you found them and come back whenever you liked to find them the same way you left them, waiting for you. The only time they changed was if some scenario or some other quest somehow affected them, or if someone started them and failed to finish them properly. As long as Elliswit left the unique quest alone and didn't accept it, she would be fine. Aiden turned to tell her to let it lie, only to find a sheepish smile on her face. "Tell me you didn't do what I think you just did," he said with a groan, not hopeful of a positive response. "First, I would like to apologize," she began, not looking apologetic at all. "Unique skills are a rare thing. You only get one every 10 levels, and I already have mine for the next few levels. It's kind of a rare chance to get 2 within 10 levels. I couldn't help myself." Aiden grunted, his brain already re-strategizing. "Besides," she went on, "you got a scenario. There's quite literally no turning back." "There was turning back for you, Princess." "And you genuinely believe I would have left you to go on your own?" she asked, arms folded in petulance. "Do you think that little of me?" Aiden shook his head. "No, Princess. It would have been easier to convince you to go back and get reinforcements, while I do my best to handle the scenario and stall for time, whatever that might entail." Elliswit squinted at him in suspicion. "Why do I feel like that would have just been a lie to get me out of here while you try and handle things yourself?" "Because it would have been."
"Does it really matter?" Aiden asked instead. "It does." Elliswit pointed a finger inside the opening, towards the new path ahead of them. "My mana keeps fluctuating, so I can arguably say I only have 70% mana at this point. You may not know this, but there's a specific type of mana that everyone knows to stay away from, and it causes this very effect on the mana pool of people with less than 50 levels. Aiden knew, but wasn't going to tell her that. "So you could be down to 12% mana," Elliswit continued, "and attempt to activate a skill that uses 10% mana only, to find yourself with 1% before the conclusion of the skill. I can't have you making such an error. It could cost you your life." Aiden couldn't believe he was having this conversation. He was more than happy to have someone play devil's advocate to all his ideas, but not this adamantly, and not when he knew exactly what he was doing. He'd fought enough gargoyles in his lifetime to know that the only one that would pose a threat to him in this scenario would be the named gargoyle. But despite how he felt about this argument, he knew that Elliswit was having it from a place of kindness and logic. Personally, Aiden would not let anyone do this scenario on their own. "I'm just one savior, Princess," he told her. "Your kingdom has 14 more back at the palace. By that logic, is it okay to sacrifice a subject of the crown when we don't have to, simply because the crown has countless more?" "No." "Exactly." "Still," Aiden said, "you shouldn't have accepted the quest. A unique skill is not that important." Elliswit snorted. "The whole unique skill thing was just a well-placed lie. I was coming with you regardless." Aiden cocked a brow, unsure of what to say to that. In the end, he settled for something less dramatic.
"Then why did you accept it?" "Because it is a unique quest, happening in the same place as a unique scenario," she said. Accepting the both of them and doing the both of them requires the same effort as accepting one of them and doing one of them. But only one of those options guarantees more rewards.
That's debatable. Aiden looked at his mana notification, and the fluctuations were slowing down. Your quest needs you to kill 31 gargoyles, while my scenario needs me to kill far less. Elaswit paused. How less? 18 gargoyles and one named gargoyle. Elaswit turned thoughtful and silent. Which means the quest and the scenario don't have the same outcome, she said finally. Then why did you get the scenario and I the quest? Shouldn't I get the scenario as well? That question had an answer Aiden didn't know, so he simply shrugged. No idea. Elaswit paused. Oh. Aiden peered into the new area revealed to them behind the natural enchantment.
It was as cavernous as the cave, but had bioluminescent moss scattered along the walls for lamination.
What do you mean by, oh? He reached a hand out, crossed the boundary that separated the both sides of the cave. I just realized I had asked a stupid question, Eliswood answered. This is my world, not yours. It was unreasonable of me to be asking you questions about it. Aiden almost chuckled. Nestild was kind of his world also. It pained him to admit it, but there were things about Earth, minuscule pieces of information he already couldn't remember. To him, they were like the things you learned in school and remembered for the sole purpose of passing your exams. The knowledge quite literally went with the submission of the paper. It's just that you always seem like you know a lot, Eliswood continued. And you do spend a lot in the library, so I guess my mind just assumed that you would know the answer. It's fine, Princess, Aiden answered, then took a step across the boundary.
It's not unreasonable. Would you like to know a secret about the whole library thing and knowing too much?
Yes, she answered, her tone puzzled as she followed him across the boundary. It's not that I know it all. It's that when I say the things I know, I imbue it with enough confidence. Trust me, it doesn't matter how unreasonably wrong you might be. If you say it or do it with enough confidence, everyone will accept it, as long as no one knows better. Eliswit shivered, but not from any cold. That's creepy. Yes, Princess, Aiden agreed with a smile. Yes, it is. Just out of curiosity, will I ever get you to call me Eliswit again? Probably not. Aiden had been right. There was no difference between this part of the cave and the part they'd come in through. As far as he knew, the walls were the same by texture and, from what the small illumination he'd gotten from the small oasis had shown him, looks.
Navigating it felt no different from when they'd entered, except for the fact that he could see far better here. Eliswit followed quietly behind him as they walked, and he paid her the occasional attention, making sure she was fine. As they walked, traversing the labyrinth of a cave in silence, Aiden picked his brain, remembering what he knew about gargoyles. The first and most common thing everyone had known about them was that they were part of the demon army's cannon fodder. They made up one of 3 creatures that graced the front lines in the war. Countless, but ultimately middling. But they had a weakness. If you couldn't overpower one with raw strength or level, then skill was the only way. How much do you know about gargoyles? Aiden asked as they walked, taking a turn to the right where the road forked. Old, mythical, extinct. Eliswit's words were simple, though she sounded a little annoyed about not knowing anything about them. My father needs to know about this. And he will, Aiden said, but only once we are done with this dilemma we find ourselves in. Eliswit made a sound somewhere between annoyed and thoughtful. Then she scratched her braided hair in frustration. I remember a part of the scripture saying something about how they are weak to fire-based spells, she said after a while. Maybe it was light. Heat-based, Aiden corrected. Fire spells worked well enough,
But for a light spell to work, it needed to be a spell that left high concentrations of light. Enough light that you could feel the heat coming from it. It didn't matter how the light presented itself. Unfortunately, Aiden continued, leading them and making sure he didn't touch the moss and algae that illuminated their path. None of us have a fire or light-based skill, unless you secretly do. He paused to give her a patient look, and she shook her head. "Sorry," she said simply. "My class doesn't have any business with spells."
Is more brute force and violence than anything else. I do have some enchanted items, and one artifact, though. Does any of the enchanted item have heat-based effects? Eliswit shook her head. Aiden wasn't surprised. What of the artifact? Doesn't have one either, she said. That wasn't exactly what Aiden was asking. Artifacts by themselves were powerful items from a forgotten time. Each one varied in what they could do, but it was accepted that they were all powerful in their own way, carrying various effects. There were limited artifacts that probably had only 12 of them in the world or something like that. Then there were simple artifacts that were countless. They weren't infinite per se, but they were a lot. Enough that you could find a couple of people who carried different variations of them. As one of royal blood, Aiden had no doubt that Eliswit's artifact was going to be powerful. What he was asking was what artifact she had. However, such a question was something to be approached cautiously. I was asking about what an artifact is, he explained. How it works, what it does. They are old magical items, she said, happy to explain. From what we know on Nastild, they are from a forgotten time, civilizations far more powerful than ours, and they are very powerful. Okay, Aiden said, allowing the word trail off as a request for her to continue. There aren't countless, but there are enough, Eliswit obliged. From what we know, there are two types, the spell-blessed and the aura-blessed. What's the difference? One is magic-based and one is not? Eliswit paused, thoughtful. Not really. Spell-blessed are more of artifacts that were specifically created through spell bindings. They were created by binding powerful spells to powerful objects, I guess. And aura-blessed? Those are sometimes simple items made powerful by association. Let's say, if a level 500 uses a spoon and develops an attachment for that spoon for long enough, it could become an aura-blessed artifact from their constant interaction with the item, I guess. That sounds powerful. Aiden took a turn the path led them down. It was the third one so far. Imagine facing someone with a spoon for an artifact. Haven't seen a spoon before, Eliswit said with a chuckle. But I have seen a rubber duck artifact. Aiden paused. That was something he didn't know about. He could only imagine what it did. He was a prince from a visiting country, Eliswit explained as they paused at another fork only to take a left. I didn't get to see what it did, but he said it was an escape artifact to help me get away from dangerous situations. Aiden made a thoughtful sound, his mind going through the possibilities of how a rubber duck could help someone escape. He couldn't come up with something that would not leave the pursuer embarrassed. How do you explain to someone that you lost your target because of a rubber duck? What of yours? He asked, then hurried to add, if you don't mind my asking. Eliswit waved the second statement aside. I don't, really. Mine's a fragment of the Mad King's bar. That stopped Aiden in his tracks. Lesser men would have stumbled from that piece of information. He collected himself quickly, pretended like he was caught in a sudden thought. He turned around, frowned, pointed one way, then the other. Did you feel that? He asked. Eliswit stood, quiet. She looked around. Feel what? Aiden let his brows furrow in thought. He licked his finger and held it up. His frown deepened. After a moment, he shook his head. I'm sorry about that, he said. I thought I felt a draft. That said, he continued moving, and Eliswit followed. "What does yours do?" he asked after a few steps. Not that he didn't know. There was no one who knew about artifacts that didn't know what the Mad King's bar did. "Nothing much," Illiswit shrugged. "My dad got one for all of us. It basically grants additional points to our stats, and when it's activated, it grants immunity to any physical skill attack for 5 seconds. Aiden nodded as she spoke. I guess she doesn't trust me very much. In his book, it was a good thing. Even a child shouldn't know the extents of what a person could do. It was either that or she did trust him, but simply didn't know the full extent of the Mad King's bar. The artifact was, according to myth, created by the human king of a kingdom with a forgotten name during the wars of the Second Demon King. Unfortunately, he hadn't had it crafted for the sake of the battle, but to keep him safe against members of his court. In his late years, he had grown delusional and paranoid, believing his nobles were out to kill him and replace him with the demon king they fought against. It was indeed madness. But his madness had led him to have the most powerful mages craft a black staff for him. What it had been capable of when it had been whole remained lost in history. But Aiden knew what its fragments were capable of. When activated, they granted immunity to the physical effects of skills for the duration of 10 seconds, though normal attacks still had an effect on the user. Passively, when equipped, the fragments granted the user 15 points to be distributed amongst their stats for as long as it was equipped. When cast on an enemy, it rendered them unable to use skills with physical effects for 10 seconds. Defensively, it activated automatically once the user is caught in a surprise skill attack, and stayed active for 10 seconds. It also grants its wielder a 30% resistance to magical attacks for as long as it was equipped. In summary, it was a powerful artifact, but not even one of the most powerful. Then how had the Mad King died at the hands of a gargoyle? Which made their current situation ironic. Of all the things the Mad King's bar could do, it had no defense against mind magic, and named gargoyles had mind magic. It was nothing powerful, but if a level 40 gargoyle used mind magic on a level 14 weaver, the outcome was definitely obvious. Aiden wasn't too worried, though. Unless he did something stupid, they wouldn't have anything to worry about. At least he knew he wouldn't have to worry about Illiswit too much. They met the first distraction of their trip almost half an hour into their journey. The maze had turned them around at least twice, and Aiden had cursed himself at least once for not having something as simple as a chalk in his soldier belts. Valden had once joked about them being one too many utility belts, but if Aiden was being honest, they were not. They didn't have the pockets or space required to hold all the things he needed that would qualify them as utility belts. But a chalk is a damn small thing, and you were coming to a maze of a cave. Aiden was the first to spot the outlier, and he slowed their pace as he drew closer to it. Illiswit followed him, her stroll coming to the speed of a crawl as Aiden knelt down beside it. The smell attacked his nose, but he gave no reaction. Behind him, Illiswit covered her nose with a hand and looked away. There was a dead body there, resting against one of the walls. It wasn't old enough to be completely decayed, but the decaying process had already started. The body was still identifiable as a male. Whoever the person had been, they'd had some funds, enough to afford a nice robe for adventuring. Aiden rubbed the hem of the robe between thumb and forefinger. Harsh. The more expensive magical robes were smoother, made of silk, most preferably silk from certain monsters that produced them. Aiden let the hem of the robe fall back down as Illiswit leaned in to look at the corpse from over his shoulder. He felt her frown, saw it from his periphery. She reached forward with her 2 fingers and pressed the corpse's neck, applied pressure. After a few seconds, she removed her hand. 3 days, give or take, she concluded. Not too long ago. Aiden agreed. He wasn't surprised to know that a member of the royal family had some medical training, enough to tell how long a body had been dead. Magic class, Aiden offered. Judging by the magic robe, cheap, so he mustn't have been very high in level, or he was perpetually broke. I take it you got that from his robe, Elliswit said. Aiden nodded. The material is too coarse. At best, it would allow him a 10% increase in most magical skills or spells. He touched another side of the robe and turned it to reveal extra seams that seemed unnecessary. Enchantments, Elliswit said when she saw them. My mom has a lot of enchanted clothes in her wardrobe. The expensive kind, though. Aiden nodded once more. He was probably an enchanter, he muttered to himself. You sound certain. Not completely, Aiden said. It's just guesswork. A deduction, but guesswork ultimately. Only those with at least the basic enchant skill would be able to activate the natural enchantment, and since my class has a distant relationship to enchantments and I have the skill, I did a little research on enchanters and learned that they like their enchanted clothes a lot. That's intentional learning right there. Well, I'm in a world with monsters and an old man that considers being attacked by a sword to be a simple dance. I'd be stupid not to know everything I need to. All right, nerd, Elliswit teased. How do you know he's not high level or rich? She's testing me, Aiden thought, and almost laughed. For starters, he said, humoring her, the material for the robe is of poor quality. He rubbed it between his fingers once more. It's too dry, almost feels like I'm touching paper. He's been out here in this atmosphere for who knows how long, Elliswit shrugged. We could attribute that to poor maintenance. She still had a hand over her nose, so her voice was slightly muffled. Aiden shook his head in disagreement. If I'm right and he's an enchanter, then he would know not to settle for poor material when he can afford the good stuff. But he got poor materials. The good stuff would need far longer to degrade to this state. Ergo, not a lot of money. Okay, Elliswit conceded. What else? He was an adventurer, not a mercenary. How do you know that? Aiden reached for the man's neck and pulled something out from under his robe. It was a small plaque, wooden brown. It had words scribbled in the common tongue on it. He has an adventurer's tag, he said, then reached inside his shirt to pull his out. Every registered adventurer has one. He read the name on the tag. Lucky. One name, not of noble blood. Town, Netted. Level 38. I guess this is why they make the tags carryable. He tugged on it, but the tag didn't snap free from the body's neck. Instead, the body jerked forward before falling back down. Aiden drew his dagger and severed the rope that kept the tag around the corpse's neck. The moment he had the tag free and in his hand, his interface came alive in front of him. Optional quest. Kind adventurer. You have found an unfortunate adventurer, dead in his quest for greater heights. Identify dead adventurers and inform the Adventure Society of their passing so that their families may have closure. Quest objective. Collect Adventure Tags 1. Reward. Adventure Society designated. Accept YN. Aiden didn't need to give it much thought before accepting. The quest merely made the task system sanctioned. If he gathered the tags and presented them at any society hall, he was likely to get a reward for it. Accepting the quest only ensured that he got the reward. The unique scenario hadn't given them a countdown, so he was more than sure it wasn't time-sensitive. If you stumble across any corpse I miss, let me know, he told Elliswit, as he pathed the robe in search of what had killed the man. I just got an optional quest that requires me to get the tags. Elliswit nodded. Poor guy, she muttered. To lose your life in a quest for a unique skill is not the way anyone should go. Aiden agreed. What was his name again? Elliswit asked suddenly. Aiden didn't need to look at the tag. Lucky of Netted.
Rest well, Lucky of Netted, she said solemnly.
Aiden ignored the irony of the man's name against his situation as he revealed the cause of the man's death. He had countless claw marks riddling his chest and abdomen. They'd torn into his shirt and rendered it next to useless, then done a complete mess of his body. The marks were so much that Aiden couldn't single out each one individually. "This is going to be a problem," he muttered. Elliswit stared at the carnage with a pained expression.
It's like a frenzy.
"And that's the problem." Aiden rose to his feet. "Either the monster was in a frenzied state, or there were multiple monsters, and I don't know which is worse." "I'd say the possibility of around 30 monsters in a frenzied state is worse," Elliswit said. "Maybe, but we also have to consider the fact that the injuries are localized to one area, the torso." Aiden slipped the tag into his pocket. "Which means that if there were more than one, they likely attacked him as one, ambushed him, and were very specific and decisive about where they were attacking. I can't say what that means yet, but I can say that's also not a problem we want to find ourselves dealing with." Elliswit took a moment before she said anything. "Either we're dealing with 30 angry gargoyles," she said, "or we're dealing with 30 gargoyles capable of working as a team with a calculated form of attack." Aiden wasn't sure if it was anticipation he heard in her voice or trepidation. As they continued down the path, meandering through the labyrinth, Aiden knew which of the two possible types of creatures they were dealing with.